This is the Hagmann and Hagmann Report for today. It is Monday, October 7th, 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann, co-host along with my son Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Folks, you're about to hear 3 hours of incredible programming, I believe, unbiased, uncensored news, analysis, and information you need to know in these perilous times. You're listening to one of the only shows, I believe, where the news is presented to you in 3 dimensions. We add the depth to the news. We look well beyond the headlines, the bylines, the fog of lies to bring you the news behind the news. For new listeners, and we have received many emails here over the last several weeks. We have many. We broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Our home base on the Internet is HomelandSecurityUS.com. We're also simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There you can tune into the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. You have to spell it all out, crunch it all together. That's the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. By the way, 2 N's on Hagmann. I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for your belief and trust in us as we do walk together through this minefield of current events. And we are definitely in a minefield. Do you hear the click when you're walking through the sand? I hope not. Tonight, Joe, we've got a wonderful man coming on, a guy that I look up to, a guy that I believe is on the cutting edge of the alternative, well, actually the new media, the real media. Dave Hodges from the Common Sense Show. He's coming on.
Yeah, and his website is The Common Sense Show. And you could have fooled me today. My mind was telling me it's Thursday because we did a show throughout the weekend. We did a show Saturday and Sunday. And now here today, Monday. Usually not used to doing the shows all week through, but well, I know we talked with Mr. Hodges and that he was going to be coming on Monday, and he's with us
actually,
now.
I almost said today was Tuesday because of yesterday, so
yeah.
I'm not even sure.
Confusing week for us, but
for those listeners who don't know who Dave Hodges is, and folks, we have a link directly to the Common Sense Show off of our website. If you go to HomelandSecurityUS.com, click on actually the second story down now. It's about tonight. You'll find a link directly to the Common Sense Show. Now, Dave is an award-winning psychologist, statistics and research professor, a college basketball coach, a mental health counselor, a political activist, and a writer. Just a tremendous writer, by the way. He's been published in dozens of publications like Freedom's Phoenix, News with Views, the Arizona Republic. He features a show called The Common Sense Show. It features a wide variety of important topics that range from the loss of our constitutional liberties, you think that's happening? I do, to the subsequent implementation of a police state under global governance. What have we been telling you? Absolutely. Dave's been on with us before, and he's a tremendous guest. We admire him, respect his work. Without further ado, Dave, welcome to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report tonight.
Well, thanks, guys. It's great to be here, and I'm eager to get started.
Well, you know what, Dave? I know that you've had John B. Wells on your program. In fact, last night John Wells was on, and John Wells referenced you and I guess us too by name as being leaders in the alternative media. Let's start there. What are we doing here in terms of causing some ulcerations to the stomach linings of the globalists?
You know, I think I just start punching, and sometimes I don't think about the end result. You know, I was a victim of the New World Order globalists. They tried to steal my property 10 years ago, and I'm talking about John McCain and his CAFTA friends, and we engaged in an 8-year battle with them for our community to hang on to our property rights. They wanted to put a Canamex highway right through our properties, and they wanted us off, and no compensation, as provided for by the Fifth Amendment. And as getting into this, I had some knowledge of what was going on, but it hadn't touched me. And when I got burned, I decided I couldn't live with what was going on. I couldn't hand off the country that I'm living in to my son, who's now in the 7th grade. And that's when I decided to get active. And I don't look at myself as the leader of any kind of movement. I'm just one really upset American and I'm taking shots at the people and exposing the people who are responsible for tearing down our way of life. And I'm not going to stop until either they bury me or until we get some measure of success and can restore at least somewhat the kind of country that I grew up in.
Perfect. It's personal with you, and you know what? It's going to get personal with every one of you, whether you know it or not. It's going to get personal with every one of you. But Dave, it's personal with you from your experience. I kind of, I shouldn't say this, laugh in a way when I hear these syndicated news jockeys or syndicated talk show hosts talk about, we've got to get their person, insert name here, we got to get them in 2016 and 2014, the midterms. We got to prevail there. What's the difference between?
There is none.
Yeah.
There is. One of the things I had to deal with because I was fighting John McCain, and I live in Arizona. I had a real upfront and close and personal view of the mainstream media, and I was the victim, and so were some of our people, of some really unfair and biased journalism. Imagine that, unfair journalism. But what I've come to realize really is if you work in the mainstream media now, you are no more than an automaton. You're handed a script, and you're told to write a story according to the script regardless of what the facts say. And this is how I now view the mainstream media. And those that can't live with it, those that basically can't forsake their training in journalism and the years they spent in college, basically perfecting their craft, they leave, like Amber Lyon, who could not stand the fact that she was witnessing CNN being bought off by the CIA to run some stories and not other stories. And that's what our media is today. And if someone's really listening to your show today for the first time and this is all new to them, the one thing I would impress upon them is I've walked down this road of believing that the media used to basically tell us the truth and that differences were due to individual differences, not truth-telling. Well, that's not so. The media is lying to us. They lie to us every day. They're propagandists no different than the Third Reich under Adolf Hitler.
Well, wow. I read your article that was published actually yesterday. America is rapidly approaching its date with destiny. Folks, you can find that at thecommonsenseshow.com. As I read that, and it was early this morning that I read this, I got to thinking, where are we at with America? And I happen to remember some things about Abraham Lincoln and about the Civil War, and of course that was truly a banker's war. But Lincoln was a dictator, plain and simple. And folks, we've been so brainwashed and historically. The history which we read or we think we know, we don't know the real history. But so I wrote an article about our date with destiny, it kind of to dovetail with yours, comparing Obama to Hitler or Obama to Lincoln, and about how the environment, how the conditions exist today that existed back right before the Civil War. And we're not too far off. I don't think we're too far off with our date with destiny. I really don't. I think you have a marvelous article there. And I do think that the winds of change are indeed blowing across America, as you point out.
Well, people are waking up, and this is the one thing that's really been impressed upon me. And I'll tell you where I came to my aha moment. I was looking at some of the spin-off effects of Common Core legislation and how certain state officials across the country were responding to that, as well as how some state officials, such as governors, were responding to the government so-called shutdown. And then I looked at the World War II vets and the Vietnam vets at the war memorials that were basically engaged in civil disobedience. And then I saw YouTube videos of just average people like you and I saying, we've come to Washington, D.C. to honor our country. We're going to see these memorials. We don't care what the government says. We're going to disobey, and we're going to see these memorials up close and personal. And it hit me at that moment that we have crossed what a lot of psychologists refer to as the 10% factor. And the 10% factor says that when you have 10% of a committed population that wants to see some kind of major change, and they hold rigidly to that idea will spread like wildfire. And I think we're there because stage 2 happens to be civil disobedience. People start respecting the law, and they start basically doing what their conscience tells them to do. And it hit me that we're seeing a sea change in America as we speak. Average people are waking up to like they have never woken up before, and our numbers are going to grow exponentially. But I believe we're also looking at, for every action there's an opposite and equal reaction. We're going to see a major pushback from the Obama administration on behalf of the globalists. Brzezinski's been lamenting the fact that we've woken up. He's talked about this a lot, and I included some of that in the article. And I do think that what they're going to do is they're going to perpetrate a series of false flag attacks. They're going to put this country under martial law. They're going to try to subjugate the journalists who are not on board as much as they can. I think we're going to find out the true meaning of death squads in this country, as my friend Roger Brown has written exclusively about. And I think we're headed for some very dark days. And, guys, I don't give dates, but if this doesn't all come down by the end of the year, I'm going to be very surprised.
Yeah, things look to be headed in a very dark direction and fast. If we could back up and go back to the government shutdown, we've noticed over the last week or so this government shutdown, and what we've been seeing in the public, I think Glenn Beck said it today, and this is from the National Park Service, they were told to inflict as much pain on the Americans as possible. We see them shutting down privately funded restaurants, privately funded areas, gating off the World War II memorials and shutting down cemeteries and actually paying to put guards up at these places. Are they making this appear worse than it is for?
Yeah, they're Obama's let's keep in mind, okay, that Obama's golf course, his federally funded favorite golf course, is still open today. It's been untouched. Yet, if you're a housewife, you're living on base, and your husband's in Afghanistan risking his life according to his mission, you can't go to the commissary today and buy groceries for 10 to 20% under market because the military people aren't paid squat. You have to drive off base. You have to go pay regular prices that everyone else pays, courtesy of the president. The president is trying to inflict as much pain on helpless Americans as possible. He's desecrating what our country stands for. They've even closed the turnoffs where you could pull off the road and look at Mount Rushmore. They've put barricades up. Why would they do that? And I read a cost analysis yesterday. It said that it cost more to shut down these memorials than it would if they just kept them open. So you're right on the money.
Dave, here's what I believe in, and ladies and gentlemen, and pardon me for my tone. You'll have to just deal with it because I think that this man, in particular, Barack Hussein Obama, Barry Soetoro, whatever the hell his name is, we really don't know who's in the White House. And by the way, while I'm at it, okay, while I'm thinking of this, those individuals out there who said it doesn't make a damn bit of difference about the eligibility matter. How you liking it now? We don't even know who in the hell this guy is allied with. We are a captured operation. Captured by whom? Who are we doing the bidding for? But anyway, back to what you just mentioned. This guy is a sociopath. He's a psychopath, in my view. And I'll tell you what, he's a dictator, and the people around him, especially the people around him. I mean, look at Valerie Jarrett, Iranian-born Valerie Jarrett. Really, who's she carrying the water for? She's got 6 Secret Service agents around her. You know what I think we ought to do? Cut all the Secret Service away from all these idiots, and just let them go on the street and let the people loose, and let's see what happens. But I'm just sick and tired of this.
Don't hold back any.
Say what?
Don't hold back any.
No, you know what? I'm so sick and tired of this. Americans are being run roughshod over day in and day out. When in the hell are the people going to say, not now, not anymore, not me, not, and this is the line. Right now, this is the line. And Ed Schultz, shut your pie hole. And Rachel Maddow, shut your pie hole. No pun intended. No pun intended. I'm sick and tired of this.
Was there a question for Mr. Hodges?
No.
No, I'm just stepping out of the way because I like what I'm hearing.
Well, this is a bunch of crap. It really is. It's a bunch of BS. And you know what? Both sides are responsible for this, and both sides are playing this silly game. But I'll tell you what, the guy that's sitting in the Oval Office is a psychopath, and he should be tried. He should be arrested, put on trial for treason, sedition, whatever. And from Benghazi to Fast and Furious to you name it, Holder too, drag Pelosi in here, throw Boehner into the mix too, throw them all in there. I'm telling you, Dave, I'm riled up tonight. So
well, I know, and sometimes, unfortunately, I have that effect on people. So let me try to move forward and be just a little bit more on the calm side. But you brought up Valerie Jarrett. You make an excellent point. This is who the president has surrounded himself with. Valerie Jarrett was so evil, so disgusting as a public figure that when she was working for Mayor Daley in Chicago as his assistant communications director, she was let go. And she was let go because she was exposed in the media as being Chicago's biggest slumlord in the Garden Grove apartments, holes in the roof, rats in the apartments. I did an article on her, and I did a 3-part series called All the President's Women, and one of the women that I featured was Valerie Jarrett. And I had the YouTube video interviews with the people from the apartments. This woman is an absolute immoral pig who's not fit to hold any public office, much less have the ear of the president. And, you know, her background, and go back to the late Larry Grathwohl, her background's been exposed. Her family, the Jarretts, and the Ayers family of the infamous Weatherman Underground, they actually intermarried. They've been friends. She's had these communist ties dating back to the Weathermen into the 60s with her family members. This is, you say, who is President Obama? He was bred by communists, Frank Marshall Davis. He was raised by communists, and he was groomed and put into office by communists. So really, should we be surprised? Shame on us for not doing our homework before the 2008 election.
Yeah, I agree, Mr. Hodges, and a lot of that was reported very tongue-in-cheek, though, not in the mainstream too much. Now, Larry Grathwohl, God rest his soul, was one of our good friends. We've had him on many times talking about what he observed, and also Mr. Para from San Francisco. He was a police officer where his sergeant was killed. But what does it tell you when Bill Ayers is out publicly disagreeing with Obama on issues like Syria and this government shutdown?
I think it's theater, and the reason I say it's theater because Larry Grathwohl was beating this drum for decades, and then here I came along as a Johnny-come-lately. I listened to what Larry had to say. I interviewed him a few times on my show, and I said, this man is right. I'm going to look into this, and I found even more. I found a lot of the Jarrett connections here dating back with her family, and I started exposing this stuff. I think the Ayers disagreement is no more than theater. It gives both plausible deniability. There's no distance between Ayers and Obama.
Okay. And that makes sense, too. Now that I'm calmed down a little bit. Joe's got a tranquilizer gun. I just have a Nerf bat. It's a long story. Anyway, this does make sense. But, you know, as we go back and we look at the different layers of Obama, how is it possible, or how is it not possible that he was bred for this position today? When you go back and look at ostensibly his mother, I'm not even sure, by the way, that Stanley and Dunham was his mother. I honestly, Dave, I've got my questions about that. But even so, that aside, working with Geithner's father, you're telling me that this is an accident that they're working at the Ford Foundation in Indonesia?
I actually wrote about that a little over a week ago, and you're absolutely right. They did do that. I'm not sure about his mother either, but I think it fits the profile given the connections. And I'll throw another one in at you, too, with Obama's background. I've come across in 3 different places that Obama's Soviet studies professor at Columbia was Zbigniew Brzezinski. How do you like them apples?
Never heard of the guy. Yeah.
We have a clip, actually, a clip of Mr. Brzezinski talking about the great political awakening that is going across the globe, and then talking about, and we'll play this during the break, how it's easier now to kill 1 million people rather than to control them, which was easier 100 years ago to control them. But now he says it's vastly easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people due to the awakened political masses across the globe.
Yeah, David, let me ask you something because of what you said earlier. Should you and me and Joe and others like us, should we be worried? Should we be concerned? Do we have extra targets on our back?
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think the FEMA camp's barbed wire faces out, or does it face in? And if it faces in, I think you and I are in a lot of trouble. Now, Steve Quayle, he tells us that the death squads are going to come and they're going to execute people like us on the spot where we stand.
Wow. Well,
we've heard a lot of things.
What about Hastings? And I'm just going back. Go ahead, Joe.
Martial law signs. People reporting seeing martial law signs in the back of trucks, which we want to kind of see those. But military movements that are being reported. People who are in reservists to the National Guard to Army and Marine units being told they can't go on leave. They need to stay 5 minutes or 5 miles within their base. FEMA has to have a 90+ people percent of their personnel active or the ability to go active at any time now. The state of readiness, and couple that with what Janet Napolitano said before she left about an unprecedented disaster. They seem to know it's coming down the pike, but aren't going to share it with us simpletons. What do you see? Do you see this as an economic crisis we need to worry about? What would you focus on mostly, seeing
they've got a lot
all
of
areas of our society?
Yeah, Joe, I think they've got a lot of options. The one thing that really concerned me was when you go to the website for the Center for Disaster Preparedness, and they talk about FEMA DHS drills in the period between September 25th and November 13th, one of the things that they mentioned was a drill that had been going on, an ongoing activity involving the training of 386,000 foreign troops, teaching them urban warfare tactics on the American landscape, as well as teaching them English. And I'm getting reports out of Victorville, California, and I've got to be careful how much I reveal here because I have sworn secrecy for this person, but he's retired law enforcement. He runs his own kind of business, and I don't want to be more specific than that allows him access on bases that average people don't get. He informed me yesterday that he saw no less than 30 trucks offloading foreign troops outside the Victorville area at the nearby base there. The names jumped out of my head. So I was wondering, when the training for these 386,000 foreign troops concluded, where did they go? Did they go home, or are they being deployed here? And what I might be hearing from my source in the Victorville, California area is maybe this is where we're seeing these troops go. They're being deployed and positioned for future use. So to answer your question, Joe, what form do I see this coming down in? The one scenario is crash the stock market, to create a bank holiday, put the troops on the street. That's one. I think more than likely, though, I think the real scenario here is that what we're going to see is a series of false flags. We've got the missing nuke out of West Texas. We've got Lindsey Graham sticking both feet in his mouth saying that if we didn't attack Syria, that a nuclear bomb's going to go off in Charleston Harbor. You know, I have to ask, what does he know that the rest of us don't? And he was just dumb enough to blurt it out. But I think that we're going to see a pandemic, and I base that on my source. I had a FEMA source that basically I revealed all on my FEMA source that he went into hiding with his family and other like-minded families of newly retired people from that agency. We came out with those reports on the same day when you had Rosebud, and I had my FEMA source, and this guy's specialty was countering bioterror warfare. And I was told that they have things that we can't even imagine how horrific they are, and he said they're going to unleash it if they don't feel they can control the people, and I'm getting my family out of harm's way. And he'd been preparing this hideaway for almost 5 years. They have their own portable air supply, water, and so forth. They left the Phoenix metropolitan area in December, about mid to late December, and I've heard from them once by a real cryptic email, and says, hope you're prepared. And I got that email sometime in March. So I think we're going to see a pandemic. I also think we're going to see a nuclear detonation. I don't think it's going to be what false flag. I think the signs are pointing to multiple false flags. And if we look at the drills laid out for FEMA and DHS, and we know the script, is they like to sponsor these drills and then bring out the false flag related to the drill. 9/11, 7/7 bombings, and, of course, the Boston Marathon, latest example. I think this is what we're looking at, and it's going to be in multiple locations. I think they are poised to bring out martial law. They're not going to be caught off guard. They're already ready for this. And these drills culminate on November 13th with the Grid X drill, which is the takedown of the grid, simulated takedown of the grid. But what if they really take the grid down? Then that would ensue such chaos. And let's say that it also is accompanied by these other false flag events. We wouldn't get hit with one punch. We'd be knocked to the ground with several punches. And I think they're hoping the shock and awe of multiple false flags will make most people fall into line. And I don't think we've got long to wait, gentlemen.
Yeah, one thing you talked about there is the Grid X power outage simulation / drill, and a lot of people were reporting that they were going to go ahead and shut the power down. People get your extra toilet paper that you need and extra water supplies. There was a New York Times, I think it was an op-ed article, talking about people needing to prepare for this, and then doing some research on the Grid X website. I found on one of the pages it says on the bottom, this will be a simulation. No power outages will, result from this. But how many times have we seen drills in the past where everybody was in place for these drills, and all of a sudden they went live right in the middle of these drills?
That's what I think, and I'm familiar with the page that you were probably looking at, Joe. And you know who published that page? It's an SPP.gov page. That is the Security Prosperity Partnership. And I had a holy crap moment when I saw that, because we're talking, that's North American Union stuff. Mm-hmm. This Grid X drill is coming off the North American Union page.
Yeah, Mexico, Canada, and U.S. are all participating in this.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? This isn't even a government drill. The SPP is extra-governmental. They're outside the government. It's the design, basically, one time they're going to bring in the Amero, although I think they've abandoned that. But they basically want to merge Mexico, Canada, and the U.S., and they're the ones that are controlling this drill. It's on their webpage. I was stunned when I saw SPP.gov. And I said, this put this in a whole new arena.
Yeah. Well, I suppose one could say, well, the grid is not confined by geographical borders, by countries' borders. However, that does put a different complexion on this drill, as you say. Man, pretty frightening.
Yeah, about 6 years back, my father and I were leaving out of town. We did a lot of our investigations on the road in New York State, and we were leaving Erie, Pennsylvania, where we lived, and we got on the exit, on the entrance ramp of the highway, and right in front of us was a truck that said Mex, U.S., Mexico, U.S., Canada. And we started seeing these around the highway, and they, continued. And this North American Union, while maybe they don't observe, the borders and lay it out for the people, but they look at North America as one big family. And you're muted, Dad. And
we saw that map slip up here not too long ago, didn't we, Dave? When they brought out that map, and it was all North America was one section.
Yeah.
Dave, and ladies and gentlemen, I just want to read or paraphrase an email I got yesterday. Dave, I want to get your reaction to this because this is new information to me. An email was sent to me, and I've been able to verify. There's enough information in here for me to verify certain things. So I could tell you with certainty that this is true. And I had said on this program before, the drones, they had said at one point 30,000 drones would be flying over the United States. I had said they were already flying over the United States, and they are, of course, it said initially they were not armed. I had said that they had the preps to be armed, Predator drones. Well, I received an email from somebody from, again, I'm paraphrasing this. We're going to say it's from the northeast part of this country, working at a manufacturing plant. They work with steel parts for larger equipment like brackets for gun turrets on tanks. Well, at the beginning of this summer, when BAE Systems discontinued their Bradley tank division, there was some work on drones. Well, at any rate, without getting too much into it, the worker for this company here in the Northeast said they are now bringing in missiles. And missiles for what? No, I mean, they're bringing in missiles for drones. So missiles and warheads that go with the drones. And there was a question, well, are these going overseas? No, they're not going overseas. So we are looking at, based on this one email here, the manufacturing or the assembly, more appropriately, of Predator drones here in the United States that are going to be here in the United States. So what do you think of that?
Well, I'll give you a scenario. You are tagged by the NSA for, quote, anti-government, anti-establishment statements, and they dial up a Hellfire missile to come to your front door. And it can be done. The technology is here. By the way, gentlemen, I just sent you, in response to your show information you sent me this morning, I sent you the link to the connection between the spp.gov website and the GridX drill announcement. So you
Perfect.
should have that in your inbox.
All right.
But back to what you were telling me about this doesn't surprise me at all. I've been told by multiple feds, and I'm sure you guys have heard the same stories, that each one of us, based on our communications, our web surfing habits, and so forth, have been assigned a threat matrix score, and that score is fluid, and it changes moment to moment. And you draw a line somewhere, and here you have maybe the upper 10% that have to be eliminated. Now, we talked about Larry Grathwohl. Larry was told by Bill Ayers that he thought that they would have to take 50 million Americans and put them in what he would refer to as like FEMA camps, and out of those 25 million Americans would have to be killed. And I think we're seeing the manifestation of Ayers' 1960 statements today, and I think the drones, in part, are going to be some of the ways that they enforce taking out selected Americans.
Well, Dave, okay, let's think this through for a second. Under what circumstance would this regime give the American people for these choice assassinations, these choice Hellfire missile visits, taking out people and families. I mean, how could they possibly justify it? Or are you envisioning a scenario where it's beyond justification and, it's pedal to the metal and it's a whole new world and it is what it is?
Well, I think the game-changing events will be the false flag events, and the pretense will be off. There'll be no modicum of pretending they were following the law. It's going to be might makes right, and that's what's going to rule this country. And then I believe they're going to start the selective assassinations.
Wow. Okay, think about that, ladies and gentlemen. You've heard that from other sources. You've heard that from us to a limited extent, but now Dave Hodges is saying this, and I've got to tell you, very well researched. Not someone from. This is not someone that is prone to making hyperbole statements, hyperbolic statements. No, this is interesting. But you said something earlier too that kind of surprised me. By the end of the year, is that just a gut feeling, or based on how things are happening? Or
well, it's partially a gut feeling, but the gut feeling really derives itself from the list of all these disaster drills. Some of the people that I've consulted with, people that really know the habits of FEMA and DHS, they tell me that they are able to carry out these disaster drills maybe every 6 months at the most. And between the period of September 25th and November 13th, there are 9 activities or 9 disaster drills or 9 preparedness drills, a combination of the 3, and the total is 9. 9 at the same time. We have never seen this in this country. Why the rush? Why are they doing all at once? Well, in one way, I think it's because they can mask a false flag attacks much easier that way by having multiple scenarios that keep the public guessing, because they know we're on to their game plan on how they carry out the false flags by embedding them in drills related to the event. But also I think that they're ramping things up because they need to move this quickly. The people are waking up, and I'll give you 2 dates. And forgive me if I said this before when I was on your show, but I still think this is significant. I've done a number of interviews in the last month on the Kennedy assassination. I've had Jerome Corsi on. I've had Jim Mars. Excuse me. And the younger people are hungry for knowledge on this. And I'm talking the under 30 crowd, under 40 crowd. And what we're looking at here coming up on the 50th anniversary of JFK's murder is the fact that we're going to have a whole new generation of Americans who never really paid attention to the forces, not just the fact that Kennedy was killed by a conspiracy, but who the forces were. The Federal Reserve, big oil, the defense industry, all with their interlocking boards of directorate, all with David Rockefeller at the helm. They're going to find this out from all the coverage that shows like yours and mine are going to give it. And then 30 days following that is the 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve Charter. And we look at these events, what's coming up here is we're going to educate a whole new generation of Americans, and that 10% figure of Americans that I estimate are awake could very well go to 30, 40, 50, and then the globalists have a major problem on their hand. And this is why I think they feel a sense of urgency to move quickly. I think Brzezinski's quotes about easier to kill 1 million than to control 1 million are very prophetic about what their plans and intentions are.
Okay. Excuse me. Okay. You said a couple of things that just perked my ears up. We had Jerome Corsi on last week, I believe it was. I don't know, time's all running together, but it's interesting because he ascribes the globalist agenda, and I believe this to be the case for the assassination. And of course, we've got his book here and gone through it, and a fantastic work, investigative work. But you said something here about the FEMA drills. You said 9 FEMA drills. Now, I got to tell you, okay, I've been looking into the significance of occult, the occult influence over the people in power, the Illuminati, if you will, the different numbers that they use or ascribe significance to. And number 9, 9 is indeed a significant number. that's troublesome. I got to tell you. Do you follow that? Do you follow the numerology?
I know it
connected with
exists. I do, Doug. I know it's there, and I've looked at it a little bit on the periphery, but I'm not the guy to really come forward with that information. There are people a lot more knowledgeable than I am.
Okay. All right. Well, I just found it very interesting because I did an article, I don't know, last week I believe it was, about the secret codes that appear to be present when like, for example, Obama talks or whoever, Hillary talks. If you looked at that recent picture, did you see that recent picture? I know you did. Well, I know you did. Biden holding that code word document, that classified document. Tell me that's an act. I mean, that's no accident. I mean, there's a message there. It's, to me, based on what I know from the communication aspect of things, he is letting certain people know, not the people like us, but the people in on this, that he has been read in on whatever the plans might be, among other things. And then there's Masonic signs in his hands and stuff like that. But that said, I mean, it just seems like this is one, as George Carlin used to say, this is a big club and we're not in it.
Well, I think you're right, and I don't know why people are surprised at the hand gestures and signals that communicate this, because secret handshakes have been part of every secret society.
Right. That's right. And you've Kennedy spoke about secret societies. Now, I know the speech, folks. I understand the speech has been edited for time, but it does convey that it wasn't taken out of context. So, that famous secret society speech. But, man, you know what, Dave? I'll tell you what. This is just really blowing my mind. I mean, if things are happening so quickly, you feel the acceleration behind everything?
Yes. Yeah. For the first time since I've been engaged in this battle, I lose sleep. I wonder if someone's waiting outside my house for me. I'm not prone to paranoia. These thoughts have actually occurred to me because some of the things that I've revealed came from very specific sources, and I think would be quite easily traced to me. And then some of my sources could be exposed. So, yeah, I have a little bit of foreboding individually on this. And you asked earlier, do we have bullseyes on our back? I think there's no question. If you just look at what tyranny does, and like when the Viet Cong would take over a city like Hue in the Vietnam War during the Tet Offensive, the first people they killed were the politicians. The second people they killed were the purveyors of the culture, the teachers. And the third people they killed were the writers, the journalists. And those are going to be the groups that any tyrannical regime is going to go after. History shows this time and time again. Right.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And, I think to our credit, and your credit, our credit, to the new media credit, I think we kind of put a fly in the ointment of the globalists with Syria. I think that we would have been knee-deep in blood running down through the streets of Damascus by now, had we not really fully engaged in the Benghazi cover-up. So that's a good thing. Do you think that we could possibly buy time at this point?
I do.
Wow.
I do.
This is
we
good.
did it with Syria. There's no question that we did a pushback on Syria. We've kept the Benghazi story alive for the most part, although I think it needs a booster shot right now. But I do think that we have the ability to do this. Otherwise, it would be time for yours truly to go into hiding. Let me tell you how far I've carried this, guys. If they want you, they're probably going to find you. But I already have a bug-out place. I will not be on any kind of communications. I won't be on the Internet. I won't have my cell phone carried with me, neither will my family, because I know a number of the ways that they can trace you. You make a landline call, the voice print would tag you right away. This is how seriously I've taken it. We actually looked into Costa Rica or Norway, and I concluded it's almost too late. And if you're on someone's list, you can move around anywhere on the planet, but they're probably going to find you. And,
wow.
we're fighting for our survival here. And people that think, well, thank God I don't have a talk show. I don't write columns like the three people we're listening to today. Well, I'd say your surfing habits have elevated your threat matrix score. And I've got this from people directly from the NSA that tell me this is absolutely going on. In fact, I was scheduled, Michael Edwards of Activist Post actually had a guy contact me who was working in the DARPA project at Arizona State University, and he was going to come on my show, and he contacted me just a little over a month ago, and we talked twice on the phone, and he says, can we do voice modulation? And I said, we can, but it's not going to make any difference. And he said, what do you mean? I said, because the NSA will take that down in 2 seconds, 0.2 seconds, and they'll know exactly who you are if they have your voice print on file, which if you're working in this project, they already know your voice print. And he talked to me about what they were doing at Arizona State University and DARPA. One of the people he mentioned specifically, he says, I've watched specifically as they have targeted and tracked Alex+Jones's every move. They listen to every conversation he has, both in person and electronic. And I said, in person? He said, yes. He said, do an experiment. He said, talk to someone without any electronic devices around and tell them you're interested in some kind of product or schooling or whatever. And he said, see if it doesn't start showing up on your home computer. And sure enough, I've had a number of conversations over the past month where I paid attention to this, and I'll talk to someone without any electronic communications around, and it does pop up. In fact, I actually mentioned it to some of my undergrad sociology students a couple of weeks ago. I said, I think the NSA is into marketing, and I don't know if this is what their bent is, but the fact is, guys, their power and reach is so great. But back to the Arizona State situation, excuse me, they are basically creating an electronic tracking system that's far beyond anything we have. It extends from the light poles and what they call IntelliStreets. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's being deployed as we speak on college campuses after being beta tested in Farmington Hills, Michigan. And this is on the Internet. You can actually go on and see it, but the capabilities are much greater. The light poles, if they're outside your home, can monitor your home communications more clearly and more accurately than even your smart meter. And then he went on to talk about all the other ways that they're going to track you. And he also talked about some of the ways that they can take you out electronically. They can induce heart attacks and strokes, through electromagnetic signals. And he said this is what freaked him out, and this is what led him to contact, Michael Edwards at Activist Post. Well, a day and a half before he was to come on my show, he bailed. He just said, I can't do this. I can't come forward. But he had given me enough that I could come out here and at least propose this to the audience secondhand. If they're doing this at Arizona State, they're doing it all across the country. In fact, I will tell you another place I know for a fact that this is going on. There's 2 other locations. Western Kentucky University in Bowling Green, Kentucky. I talked to a professor. She's not willing to go on the air, but she openly said this in front of several witnesses in the room from which she was speaking to me on the phone. And she's a recently retired professor of journalism. And she said that they were doing mind control experiments at Western Kentucky with a Chinese national professor who had been there for over 2 decades. His experiments were so horrific in their effects that the senior level administration moved him to an agricultural farm off campus because some of the faculty were freaking out. The CIA has invaded that university. This woman was teaching journalism techniques to foreign journalists, and they all said they were being paid by the CIA. It's just incredible. And then you go to San Diego State, and I've met a lady called Virginia Farver. She lost her graduate son to overexposure to electromagnetic radiation. They had a cell phone tower right outside his dorm when he was in grad school, and he died of brain cancer. And this turned Virginia into a crusader, and she has discovered that they're doing work to basically hook all the electronics up and coordinate it with the Gwen towers. And I said, so where is all this going, Virginia? And she said, it's mind control. It's electronic mind control that's going to come into your house from your smart meter. You're going to be exposed to it when you're driving on the road. It's going to come out of cell phone towers. Now, let me just digress just for a second. If we go back to 1961, that technology has been with us for over 50 years. A guy named Jose Delgado, a Spanish physiologist, implanted an electrode in the limbic system of a brain that controls the emotional response, and he did a bullfight that's actually on YouTube. The bull's charging him. He presses the device. The bull calmly walks away. He eventually got it to the level when he was brought over to Yale University to where he could do it wirelessly and didn't need surgical implantation. And then Jose Delgado disappeared and went to work at the Stanford Research Institute. And by disappeared, I mean his publication trail stopped cold in 1968 when he went to work for SRI. And then in 2005, shortly before his death, he came out publicly, and you can find this on the Internet, and he said, we shouldn't be doing the mind control that we're doing. This is what's coming, guys.
We interviewed Dr. John Hall, who wrote extensively about Jose Delgado. And folks, you can go back and listen to Dr. John Hall from September 11th of this year, the interview where we did about mind control. Dave, with the shootings, the Naval Yard shootings, the
Sandy Hook, Aurora.
Well, yeah, mind control. What do you think? Hearing voices? I mean, my goodness. Or is it a combination of mind control, pharmaceuticals, or what's the deal?
Well, the University of Arizona has resurfaced MK Ultra. They don't call it that, but they're engaged in some of these very things, and I have sources on the inside that have shared with me that this is exactly what they're doing, biochemical and electromagnetic stimulation, which is classic MK Ultra. And you said voices in the head. We have so much confirmation of the ability to put voices in people's heads. It's not even funny. The best source in my book is Dr. Nick Begich, from Alaska. He demonstrated this in 1997 to the European Parliament, and they passed a resolution based on his demonstration that they would not allow this kind of technology to be used. But it's so covert, how would anyone be able to stop it or know?
Wow, that's very interesting. And what's even scarier is I've been doing a lot of research on the medical devices, the Obamacare RFID, and now we know the President Obama is coming out with the BRAIN initiative. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. But
yes.
The merging, I saw a video where it talks about the BRAIN initiative the President does, and it goes on to talk about how the computer chips can be placed on brain cells, and they interact without any help. How the brain cells and the computer chips are basically compatible, and they can grow brain cells on these computer chips. And really, what they call it, not the transhumanism, but the merging man and machines. That is not too distant in our future. And through Obamacare, through so many of these governmental agencies, they have the framework together to do this, and even setting up the Commission on Bioethical Issues. In that executive order, it's 13/5/21, Obama says that there will be a time where human rights and science intersect. Transhumanism. Thank you, JJ. Yeah, is that what we're talking about here? Is the ultimate goal of all this electronic and technological innovation and human beings and the experimentations that they've been carrying out?
Well, I think unquestionably it is, but I don't think it's a simple application. It's not a one-dimensional application. And there's a plan for the elite where they really hope to physically escape their bodies and have their consciousness put in some kind of receptacle, robot, whatever it is they choose to be, but they want to achieve immortality. And they refer to this as the singularity concept. For the rest of us, it's about, and I'll tell you where you see this. If you went and saw the Superman movie that came out last summer, I took my son to see it, and I was stunned in the first 20 minutes. They started the show back on the planet Krypton, and they hadn't had any live births other than Superman himself. And they mentioned in there that they bred people to do certain functions, and they could turn on and turn off genes. Well, the newer research that I've come across, thanks to my friend researcher Bob Peterson, who really is an expert on transhumanism, she said that they're working on frequency adaptations to turn on genes and turn off genes in live human beings right now. And she said this could very easily be adapted to where you have designer babies that are designed for whatever it is. And so, the general, I forget his name now, it starts with a Z, in the movie Superman, made the statement, I was born to be a warrior and nothing else. And I do think that what they're going to do is those of us that let us survive, the 10% that survive what the Georgia Guidestones talk about, we are going to be genetically manipulated into a dumbed-down slave race. And this is something I wasn't going to talk about tonight, but it's something that I have personal interest in, even though I don't write about this because I leave this to the experts like Bart Peterson. But I do believe this is where it's all headed. And I'll give you something that has caused me to lose a little bit of sleep. My FEMA source, and this is a person who I knew for 20 years, when they were leaving, the show Revolution had been out for about 2 months, and he said, you watch that show, don't you? And I said, yeah. He said, number one, the blackout's coming. That's why the Grid X drill hit me so hard. But he also said, all the fascination in the media with the zombies? He goes, don't laugh, Dave. He said, they're doing anti-zombie drills as we speak. And he was right. They were doing one in San Diego, sponsored by DHS, and then a future one was scheduled, I think it was in the month of April of this year, either in Montana or Idaho. I don't have my notes in front of me for that. And I said, so what's the significance? He said, we can turn people into zombies. He said, we can do it pandemic release with a bioagent. He said, we can also do it electronically. And he said, this is coming. And he said, this is why we're going into, he said, if they can't control humanity, they're going to turn humanity on itself. And I started thinking, okay, listen, this guy wasn't given to fanciful discussions. This guy, very pragmatic. His kids were great athletes. They were just normal people. But I started thinking about, could his interpretation of what's coming be accurate? And I go back to something that happened in August of 2012 where Simon Properties signed an agreement with DHS, and they're the biggest owner of malls and strip malls in North America, that would allow their malls and strip malls to be used for refuge centers in times of national emergency. And then right on the heels of that, so did the NBA, the National Football League, and Major League Baseball. They offered up their sports venues for the same reasons. And I started thinking, if you turned humanity loose on each other, now this is just speculation, but if you did it through basically the zombification or electromagnetic stimulation of the brain that made people go crazy, and humans were attacking humans, of course they would seek refuge, one for food, but mostly for protection. And it's just an operating theory I have that we could be looking at something like this in our future. And once they have us in these, quote, relocation centers, would that be the real FEMA camps? Would that be maybe why we find out why they have 30,000 guillotines that have been shipped into this country?
Wow. What's your confidence, speaking of guillotines, what's your confidence factor of the fact that they're here? And because we often hear talk of them. When I was on the radio early on, back in the early 2000s with Kathleen Keating, we talked about that. But what's your confidence factor that they're here?
Well, it's not what I think my confidence call is. It's what the Georgia State Legislature almost did back in the 1990s when they wanted to replace their capital punishment from the electric chair to the guillotine. This was actually serious legislation that was proposed and voted on.
Yeah.
So somebody thinks they're here in an official capacity.
Yeah.
Do I have shipping manifest orders? No. But Bill Pollack, he was a long friend of mine, died 5 years ago. He was on Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project, and his videos all over the Internet. Bill told me years ago, he said that, we have a lot of secret FEMA camps around the country. Some of them are even underground, abandoned military bases, and he said they all have guillotines. So I can source this to a source that I trusted.
Okay. Well, and I, too, can do the same. Wow. Folks, you're listening to Dave Hodges, a good friend of the program. Dave Hodges, The Common Sense Show, thecommonsenseshow.com. You've got to bookmark his website. We are just getting warmed up. On the other side, I've got several pointed questions I've got to ask. In fact, we are getting questions, Dave. I got to tell you I've got 2 emails here from Europe, including one from the UK. I've got a couple from Canada, several from the United States. I don't even think we can answer half of these questions directed to you about what you see coming here and the different things that you already spoke about. But that said, folks, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this very special program, the 7th day of October 2013. This is really a groundbreaking program as far as I'm concerned. Our special guest, Mr. David Hodges, we're going to be right back after these messages. Stay with us.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of this Monday, October 7th, 2013 edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, where we are joined by our very special guest, Dave Hodges from thecommonsenseshow.com. Folks, you can listen to his show on Sunday nights. Go to thecommonsenseshow.com and sign up via RSS feed, or you can download the podcast from iTunes, as I do, and go back and listen to them whenever you do have time. But if you do have time, listen to them live on Sunday, as Dave Hodges is a man on the front lines of the alternative media, fighting the battle that the regular media no longer even will say exists. With that, Mr. Hodges, it's glad to have you back for the second hour, and I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Back. Let me read to you a couple of real quick things that are kind of timely to what we're talking about. First of all, one of my trusted sources during the break actually sent me an email and says, Dave, you need to check out Operation Urban Shield, October 25th through the 28th, San Francisco Bay Area, and it involves a dozen foreign countries. The speculation is they're going to simulate door-to-door raids. So that was one that was new on me. I don't know if you guys have heard of this.
Okay, I received something earlier today. You said something, simulate door-to-door raids. What does that mean exactly? Because I received a similar wording, and how can you do that? How can you simulate door-to-door raids? You either do it or you don't.
Good question. I think we're talking about gun confiscation. I think it could be a beta test.
Okay, that makes sense, because that's the feeling I got when I saw what I got, and I think they're 2 separate sources, obviously. But now, holy cow!
Speaking of home raids, have you seen the forced home inspections that they're talking about doing under the Obamacare?
Plan? I wrote an extensive article on that.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to toot my horn, but I saw the initial reports. They didn't go deep enough. They basically said if you were a mom under 21, they could come into your home because you're at greatest risk to abusing your kid. And they had some other preconditions. And I went and I found the 110-page manual that was created by an organization called ICF, and they're a think tank organization that writes a lot of government legislation, particularly with regard to social legislation. And they had written this document for the UN, and they distributed it, and I was able to track it. It went to the World Health Organization. It went to UNESCO. So basically, it was written for the United Nations. Kathleen Sebelius from Human Health and Services adopted this manual. They slightly revised it, and it's now a 110-page manual, and I have a link to it. I'll have to go back and try to find the title to my article because I wrote this sometime back in August. But I'll give you a kind of a thumbnail sketch on what I found out when I read the 110-page item, and I read it cover to cover. They can come into your home unannounced. They can bring a cop with them. They can barge right in, and you could be in some trouble if you have alcohol in the house. They could take your kids. It's all discretionary as to the field agent. If you have a gun, they can take your kids. If your child has received a bad grade, they refer to this as a category called educational neglect. They can take your child, but they don't specify what the bad grade is. They can also take your child if they've been absent for more than 5 days from school in any 30-day period. So maybe you had a death in the family out of town and you traveled that and your child was gone for a week. Your kid could be taken from you. These are the kinds of things that's in Obamacare, and it's in this 110-page manual. It is so draconian, so nightmarish, and we think CPS is bad now, wait until January 1st comes and this kicks in.
That's a good point. We're seeing so many. Wow. Okay.
Of course, when you talk about this, I had someone write to me today on the comment board of my website, and I copied and pasted it just as a reminder to check my own sanity. This person said, "I wish there was a nice way to tell you this, but you are all insane. So pathetic the way your group mind attempts to function. Fox and the right-wing radio has really done a number on your poor psyches. Wishing you better mental health."
Wow.
So there are a lot of Kool-Aid drinkers out there still.
Yeah, and that's what we. And I've got to tell you, Dave. Let me ask you the question: how do you handle? I'm sure you've got close friends, family members, even perhaps that think that you're just a little bit off. How do you handle that?
Well, I was actually married to someone who thought I was going off. When we were fighting against the forces of John McCain for North American Union control of my property, I told my wife, I said, "You're not going to believe the crap I'm finding here that's associated with this." And then I fell into a local radio program. I'd been on it so much that the guy gave me a show. And my first interview was with Jerome Corsi, and the topic was the North American Union. And my wife said, "I think you've lost your mind." And she doesn't say that any longer. She's right in lockstep with me. She sees pretty much what I see. So I've experienced that, up close and personal. It is what it is now.
Wow.
My relatives, from my niece to my nephew to my sister, they don't have the depth of information that we do, but they do accept the fact that things are really, really bad and they're going to get a lot worse. So I don't face a lot of resistance within my family. Now, outside, guys, which you probably hear the same thing. If you talk about anything that casts the government in a bad light, they've been conditioned by the media with one response: "Oh, you're one of those conspiracy theorists." And I usually like to respond and say, "Oh, you're one of those coincidence theorists that think everything happens by chance." And that's kind of the battleground that we're on. But I have to tell you that this agenda of the globalists is so exposed now, it's so out in the open, that the only people that don't see it are the ones that refuse to see it. The ones who I have say they have cognitive dissonance. Don't confuse me with the facts. I want to stay in my kitchen. You remember that clip from the movie Network where Howard Beale says, "I'm not going to leave you alone, and I want you to open up your window and yell out, 'I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore'?" That's kind of where we're at now. He recognized there in that movie, that clip recognizes there are the sheep that bury their head in the sand, but there are also people who really are kind of frightened and they're afraid to act. And I think we have to give those people a conduit, and shows like yours are a great outlet for people who are confused and fearful about the future, where they can tune in and find out what's going on so they can begin to plan appropriately. And that kind of leads me into one more thought. And that thought is this. People ask me this often: are we headed for a revolution? My first answer is, I hope not, but some days I feel like it's inevitable. And I'll tell you how I think the revolution is going to start. People like the three of us, and probably most of your listening audience, aren't going to overreact to events as they come down the pike. We're going to monitor, and we're going to adjust, and we're going to adapt. We know that they're going to take the food from us, so we're going to hide our food. We're going to store even more food. We're going to have safe houses. But to the people who are clueless, to the people who aren't awake, and when they cannot put shoes on their kids' feet and food on their kids' table, they're not going to have a measured response. The sheep, who comprise about 70% of this country, are going to go from 0 to 60 in about 2 seconds, and I believe those are the ones that are going to really cause this to escalate to a higher level of violence.
I couldn't agree more. And, you're talking about the people who are staying in their little bubble, willfully ignorant. There's a headline here: Democrat voters confused. I didn't realize I would be the one who is going to pay for it personally, talking about Obamacare. And too many times it is too little too late, when people realize that what they've understood or what they've believed in has been completely wrong. And even for us, when we started doing this, our eyes and ears were opened by a lot of things, even further down the rabbit hole that we might not have wanted to realize in the beginning. And my dad opened the show with this, and you guys talked about this, the 2014 elections. I saw a video clip on Real Clear Politics where Chuck Todd was debating, this 2014 will be the year the Democrats could win back the House, and et cetera. Is it too late for politics? Is it too late for the voting booth in America?
That's a really good question. I'm probably going to vote, although right now today, as I sit here, I think it's a futile effort. If we were going to turn this around politically, we would get candidates to replace everyone who's in Congress right now. No incumbent can stay, no matter how much we like them, even the ones we like, because people aren't discerning enough in the political arena across the country to make good decisions. So I think we'd have to have a blanket kick them all out mentality. And if we got people in there, and if we did one thing, it would be to disallow and make it a felony punishable by 20 years in prison for any politician to entertain a lobbyist, to take their money, to do anything connected with the corporations. And we need to get the businesses totally out of the lives of our Congress so they can begin to focus on the people. And if we had one-term limits following that, we might have a chance to take back the government. But then I put on my reality hat, and I'm saying, well, if I was a globalist and I knew that there was this get rid of all the incumbents movement, I would just pick the key positions in Congress and the Senate, and I'd say, okay, who do I want to get elected here? And that's where I'm throwing all my money, to both candidates who I control. So to answer your question, I think I've talked myself into the notion that it's almost too late for politics. If we're going to win this at all, and I don't know that we can win it, I think we can force a stalemate. We can be the Viet Cong in Vietnam, not win any battles, but keep the war going. We stop participating in their financial systems. We get out of the banks as much as possible. May not be entirely possible. We stop shopping at the Kmarts, the Walmarts, and all the other slave labor marts, and go to your local businesses. We should trade and barter and keep our purchases off the books as much as we can. And, of course, legally withhold as much money from the IRS, who are the collection agents for the Federal Reserve, as much as possible. That's where I think we can begin to really strike back at the globalists.
Fantastic. And I think you're right. Dave, I just got to read this email I just got in from Kelly from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, I believe that is. Yeah, Manitowoc, Wisconsin. Please ask Dave, how does he know all this stuff? I mean, I'm paraphrasing now. There was a couple other things in here, basically, do you? I mean, you must study this stuff all the time. I mean,
well,
it sounds like it.
I come by some of this honestly, and I go back to my dad was in charge of rewiring the Combat Information Center on the aircraft carrier Roosevelt as they accepted the first nuclear weapons. And then from there, he was early retired with full benefits from the Navy 6 months early. He went to work at Martin Marietta, which is now Lockheed Martin, in the mountains outside Littleton, Colorado. And there he worked with German scientists in the final days of what we would loosely today call Operation Paperclip. He told me about most of his ventures in the last year of his life when he was terminal, and I used to visit him every night. And, of course, I had to keep this secret until my mom passed because he revealed some classified information, and had I come out with that in any form, my mom could have lost his Navy pension. So, I had to remain silent up until about 2 years ago when my mom passed. So, I've had some knowledge of some of these things. And then I moved forward, and Bill Pollack, a person of note, and I mentioned him earlier, he did the disclosure video with Stephen Greer. He and I were friends for years and years, and he is the late significant other of my news director now, Annie DeRiso. And Bill, did a lot of work for the CIA, and he really educated me as to what was going on. And he actually crossed paths with my father when my dad left Martin Marietta. He went to work for Sunstrand Electric in high-level surveillance satellites, which was also in the Denver area in a suburb called Westminster, and they crossed paths there. And Bill sought me out, and because I was a Hodges, and we became friends. And from here I met Vance Davis, NSA guy. He's really gone inactive now. He's under the radar. But he used to be on Coast to Coast with Art Bell in the early days of that show quite often. And he was living locally here in Phoenix, no longer does. And he used to give me Saturday morning updates. I'd go visit him, and he'd say, this is what this is all about. And he reached into some of the highest levels of NATO in his service until he ran afoul of George Bush, and they put 7 of them in prison, and then the sentences got commuted. So this is where I started developing real sources, and then from there, other sources just kind of came to me. I mean, they're happenstance. We all have these abilities to really hook into people who have a piece of this picture. I'll give you an example. Back, it's almost been 20 years. The Maricopa County health officials came to my campus where I was teaching, and they asked for volunteers to be first responders, and they said, and your family will get the drugs first. And I thought, well, that's kind of a good deal. If we ever have bioterrorism, I'd like to be able to have the drugs. So I volunteered, and then FEMA was created, and then FEMA came in, interacted with us for a while, and then they took the entire process over. This is where I met my FEMA contact that's gone into hiding. So that was just purely happenstance. And then I knew his kids and watched his kids grow up. And so this is how I've developed some of my sources. It's basically I had a good base of sources to start with, and then I've kind of developed them as we go through. And you guys know this better than anybody, I'm sure. I get tips all the time from people saying that they know. Most of them end up being garbage, but there's about 10% of them there that have some merit. And after you've done this for a while, you start to develop a little bit of discernment, and you can tell the real ones from the phony ones.
Very true. No, that's sorry about that. That's very true. You mentioned FEMA. I just recently learned, and I didn't know this. And Dave, do you know this that there was a lawsuit here back in the 90s, $63 million lawsuit, as a matter of fact, was filed by Massachusetts attorney Ray Coleman on behalf of former Green Beret Bill Tyree. The reason I mention this is this lawsuit alleges that FEMA was originated and funded by laundered drug profits. FEMA was never created by congressional mandate, congressional law. The history of FEMA as an illegal, unconstitutional entity has been most recently exposed in this lawsuit. And this is against the CIA and its alleged drug trafficking and money laundering operations. Did you know that? I mean, I just found that rather interesting. I had no clue.
Some elements are. I'll tell you who I think knows a lot of this. Do you know who Bob Mazur is?
Boy, that name rings. Mazur, I believe?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I've had Bob on my show a couple of times, and he went underground to basically, and this was for the DIA, and he's also worked for the FBI, but he went underground and helped take down the Pablo Escobar empire by busting some of his lower-level lieutenants. And he also was responsible for bringing down, what was the BCCI bank scandal. Oh, yeah. He was directly centered into that. And Bob's been on my show, and I've talked to him off air some, and what he told me says, first of all your banks, every one of them, is laundering drug money. He said that on my show, too. It wasn't just a private communication. And he said they love to launder for the Mexican drug cartels. And he said that the whole system is so corrupt it needs to be torn down and we need to start over. And here's a guy who was an award-winning DEA, FBI agent, meritorious service, and he's telling us how corrupt our system is.
That's unbelievable.
So am I surprised at this? No. The CIA, my dad told me this, and he was in naval intelligence. He said the CIA was running drug operations out of Southeast Asia in the 1950s.
Well, they're still running drugs today. So, I mean, no one should be surprised. I mean, for Afghanistan, what are we doing over in Afghanistan? We're guarding poppy fields.
And we see the stories of all the banks from HSBC to the different branches that have been paying $million fines on billion-dollar drug laundering, on being caught laundering billions of dollars of drug money. And to see the fines at a percentage point of what the actual profit of that drug laundering would be, it's just sad. I mean, they don't put these guys out of business. There's no accountability in our executive branch or our judicial branch or the legislative branch anymore. It is all point the finger, pass the buck, and this is bringing me to my next point. From the government shutdown to the now we're hearing about the fault all the time. And I heard, I think it was Mark Levin from last week get into this pretty good, that Obama seems to be in company, seems to be setting up an arena to where they want a actual debt ceiling not to pass, to break what they say will be the most horrendous thing to the American people, would be not to pass a debt ceiling, raise it again, and have an economic shutdown versus a government shutdown. Do you think they're aiming for this economic shutdown, continuing their motto of crisis or order out of chaos?
Well, I used to treat psychopaths and sociopaths as a mental health counselor, but I don't pretend to really fully understand their rationale, because sometimes they're totally irrational. I don't know. I really thought Obama came in with a mandate. His mandate was to usher in cap and trade and to totally reduce our energy usage, put us into an 1890s lifestyle, while the rich corporations controlled all the assets. And if you control the energy, you control the businesses. I don't know if you know this or not, but he and Valerie Jarrett, when they were board members on something called the Joyce Foundation, which was started by Al Gore, they actually came up with the seed money to start the Chicago Climate Exchange. That was something I found in regard to my Gulf oil explosion research. It was kind of serendipitous, and I said, this is why he became president. He tried to bring in cap and trade into the Senate in his first year, and they rejected it. So I think that was his original mandate. Plans can change, and so the globalists might have been telling him things like, Zygmunt calls him up and says, Barack, this is not working. We may not be able to get cap and trade in directly. Let's try to do it at the local level some. But that's a slow burn process. Maybe we just need to collapse the whole economy together. I think it's possible. I mean, I'll give you a scenario for Grid X, and I've thought about this. If you want to usher in a new currency and do a Greece, Cyprus kind of devaluation of what we have in our banks or our pension funds, collapse the banks. But if you don't want it to be a wild revolution, like America could do with all our guns, unlike the Greeks, do it within the Grid X blackout drill. And if you think about it, if they take the power down on November 13th, and then they collapse the banks, let's say on November 16th, that's the third day. And you guys know this as well as anybody. On the third day, people are looking for food. They're in the streets. There's chaos. And a lot of people aren't going to be looking at the digits on their bank account, especially with the power being out. That would be a perfect time to take down the banks and collapse the economy.
And then what? I mean, it's just utter chaos, right? I mean, it's like a Jericho. Well, maybe that's the wrong movie. It would just be utter chaos everywhere.
And feed in and go to your theory about us destroying each other, which is one thing I've always thought is going to be the way that they're going to try and do this, is to create a civil war mentality so we take out each other, even though we're fighting, not fighting the problem, we're going to be fighting one another and fending off one another. And they'd rather see us kill each other than come in when we're battered and beaten, rather than trying to take over now.
That's what I think is the likely scenario. I remember we did a disaster drill in this country. It was nationwide, and I had just moved to Phoenix, so it would have been, roughly 1986. And they did a drill where they shut down the entire interstate highway system, and they had guards with jeeps, military jeeps, at every on-ramp. And I actually talked to a couple people later on that participated in the drill, and I said, what's the purpose? They go, well, they were simulating the country going into rioting. And I said, so you shut down the grid to keep people from going to victimize people across town? He says, no, we're trying to confine the violence. He said, we were told that we would be trained to basically shut down cities, and the people in the cities could do whatever they wanted to each other so long as they didn't leave and they could contain the damage. And this is to your point, Joe. This is, I think, a likely scenario. I mean, if you've got someone who's trying to break into your house to steal whatever food and water they think you might have when the power goes out, you're not going to be able to call 911. No one's going to come and rescue you. Heck, if we go off Hurricane Katrina figures, 60% of the cops by the third day in a crisis where their families aren't tucked away in safety, they're going to walk off the job. You're going to get no support. You're totally on your own.
Well, what's your feeling if, and I've got to ask this, if you live in, I don't know, maybe a suburban type area, not in the city, just out in a suburban area, and what we're talking about does happen. You've got guns, you've got food, all right? So, assuming that you survive the initial whatever, are your chances good of surviving? I know that's kind of an out there question, but I think a lot of our listeners are in that position. Some are in the city, some are in the outskirts, but are we going to be just shooting people from the front windows of our home who try to come in and then dragging their bodies across the street or down the road? I'm trying to get a visual of this.
Yeah, well, let me respond this way. Occasionally, I get to have some fun. I get to teach an undergraduate sociology class. So you talk about the construction of society, the different levels of society, the institutions of society. And then I got an idea after I went to Congressman Trent Franks' briefing, in which he actually came to my church for a town hall meeting. He showed a 30-minute video of terrorists detonating 2 nuclear weapons over mid-continent United States, and the power grid would go out. He started saying 90% of the people in our projections would be dead in 2 years, and he went through all the scenarios. Well, I took that away as an educator, and I said, what a great activity for a class. Let me create a disaster scenario, and let me see if I can find all the information that's out there on disaster preparedness and what the likely chain of events that would follow. So I feel I've got a pretty good working knowledge because I actually, whenever I teach this class, I do this activity as a final summative project. And what I've discovered is where you live makes a huge difference. Your biggest threat, if you're in the city, will be to organized gangs because they already have the infrastructure to go out and secure resources. They have guns and they have numbers, and they can overwhelm a household quite easily. In fact, there are scenarios that you read about where the gangs will be going house to house to have their way. Whatever they want to get is what they're going to try to take. And there won't be anybody to stop them except for the residents themselves. And most people in the suburbs have their 6-foot block fences. They don't communicate with their neighbors. So their families are largely going to be on their own. Now, there's a few things that I've learned that people can do to greatly enhance their survival. If they're in an urban or suburban home, get the security doors that are really hard to break down. I mean, even the battering rams of the SWAT teams have a hard time with them. And if you can afford it, get the coverings, the Kevlar coverings for your windows, and make them mechanical and not electric, because if the power's down, you're not going to be able to put them down or lift them up later. So you want them to be mechanical. These aren't fully bulletproof, but they make it impossible for people to get into your place through your windows. And it's not going to stop people from burning out your house, but think like criminals think. They want to go to the place of least resistance. So you want your house to appear to be a fortress. Oh, that's too tough. Let's go to the next house there. That looks a lot better. So you want the eyes of these predators just to roll right over you. And then if you live in the suburbs, you're not going to face quite the virulent gangs that you are going to be in central urban centers. But you're going to have a lot of desperate people doing a lot of desperate things. And one scene I remember from the show Revolution was very early on. One of the main actors in the show, who's one of the antagonists, his home was broken into by his neighbor and he had resources and he had to kill him. And I think we're going to see that scenario played out over and over. Now, I didn't move to the country with this in mind when I did it. I was trying to escape gangs and a bad negative lifestyle to try to raise my family. So I live out in the country, and I'm about I'd say 20, 25 minutes north of metropolitan Phoenix. My community consists of about 2,000 people spread over, I'd say, probably about 40 to 50 acres. We all have 1 to 2 acre homes, small business owners. We're pretty well armed out here. And I know my neighbors well because when we had to fight against John McCain, we were very, very united. There's only one way into my place and only one way out. It's a 2-lane road. We're off the beaten path by about 6.5 miles. So I'm in a pretty good position, but it doesn't discount the fact that I don't have neighbors who aren't going to be prepared and on the 3rd, 4th, and subsequent days aren't going to be coming to look for whatever resources they can take. The good thing about my community is we do communicate with each other pretty well. So those are some of the things I discovered from the scenario that I created as a class project. The worst thing that you can try to do is drive out of the city. You'll get gridlocked, you'll be on the highway, and you're easy pickings when you're in that situation.
Oh, okay. And thanks for this, because a couple of people have emailed me from different parts of the country saying, well, you've talked about a lot of scary stuff here. What about proactive measures we could take? Obviously, water, food, guns and ammunition, if you can, to the extent that you can.
Gold and silver, alcohol and cigarettes would be useful.
Perhaps.
Don't forget your medicines. One of the things that we discovered in our class project was you're going to have a lot of people who might be diabetic, they might be asthmatic, so they're going to need to have their medicines. And I tell people, store up medicines as much as you can, because you're not going to be getting any medications once this starts.
And how long, I got to ask you this, how long do you expect this chaos to reign supreme? Months, years, definitely? Will it be under control?
Well, again, looking at it through the eyes of a psychologist, sociologist, every crisis has its flashpoint, has its trigger event, and it has its burnout point. So this won't go on indefinitely, and this is why I'm kind of enthralled with the show Revolution. Now, it's kind of turned into a storyline where you like the characters, but in the initial part of the show, there was really good social science there. People basically organized themselves into collectives for protection, just like wolves in a pack. And this will happen relatively quickly, and I'll say within 30 days I would suspect this would happen. I think the chaos would really subside over about a 30-day period. But again, you'd be living in Somalia, so anywhere you go would be a danger point where you could be a victim of a highway robbery. But as far as just the mass looting and the total insanity, I think that would burn itself out anywhere from a period of about 7 to 10 days, 30 days at the outside.
All right. Dan from New Mexico wants to know where our leadership will be during this period, meaning the 535 and the royal families of this country.
We got a partial glimpse of that when they did Operation Mountain Guardian. I don't know if you recall that drill 2 years ago in Denver, where the FEMA went unannounced and took kids out of elementary schools and took them to Sports Authority Field where the Denver Broncos play football, and they held the kids there. And they actually had hired actors to come in and simulate being frantic parents to desensitize the workers not to release the kids. Now, they didn't treat the kids badly. They let them play games, and they fed them. There wasn't any maltreatment of the children. And then about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when moms were trying to get their kids from school, they found out what was going on. This actually reached the media, and there was a storm of parents that went to Sports Authority Field, and they were turned back. So, and it's amazing to me, and I'll get to the point here with the elite and where they'll be, but FEMA thought they had the right to take your kids out of a public school. And I want to talk about bus evacuation drills before we're done, too. But when you look at what happened in Denver, they shut the airport down, and if memory serves me correctly, it was for about 2 days. Obama was there. Hillary Clinton was there. A lot of corporate notables were there. And they went under DIA, which is, rumored to have tunnels connecting to Cheyenne Mountain, where NORAD's located 75 miles away, and this massive tunnel system. that is stocked for long-term survival. That's where the elite are going to be. This is why they've built these massive underground structures, and where the majority of these people are going to be allowed to sit out the chaos that's going on above ground. But let me mention something else, too. I think it's really important that parents look at this carefully, and I've had to instruct my son on this. Every school is doing what they call FEMA-mandated bus evacuation drills. And in these FEMA drills, and they're run by local agencies, the kids get on the bus, and they simulate leaving school property, although they never do. And it's mandated by law that every public school has to engage in these drills. And we do them here in Arizona routinely once a year. Well, what concerned me was what I learned from Operation Mountain Guardian was that FEMA could just snatch your kids and hold them and deny parents access to their children. So I've done my duty as a father, and I've told my son, an announced drill is one thing, you probably don't have anything to worry about, but if they tell you it's time to go get on the buses, you go to a preset hiding place, and I'll know what's going on, and I'll come and find you. And we'll try to reunite. And actually, as the Grid X drill gets closer, I'm going to make sure we all have walkie-talkies. We own them, but we're actually going to distribute them among our family members so we can communicate up to a distance of about 25 miles. And I'm hoping that system. There's a reason why they do drills. Why would they waste all the time, money, and resources to do these kind of drills if they weren't going to act on them someday?
Yeah, that's very true.
And if we work on the premise that this administration has a false flag mentality, I think we all need to be a little bit concerned about what they're going to do with our kids. I'm sure you guys have been exposed to the literature that talks about when they come to take you to the FEMA camp, they're going to separate the family members.
Yes,
this would be one way to do it.
Yeah, they have actually a few documents that lay out all the techniques from point of capture to point of delivery and how they silence people. What they even one of the documents is fasten a clean cloth around a person's mouth. Not tying it too tight or applying duct tape type adhesives, but just kindly tie a cloth around their mouth to keep them quiet. To the religious aspects of what they'll do, teaching only the nationally accepted versions of X such religions, whatever the religion of the host nation is, as the terminology they use. And we see this in documents, and it's becoming more. I'm not sure how many of the plans you've read, the strategic plans of DHS from 2015 to 2019 and FDA 2011, 2016. They are getting ready to, and the national preparedness plans that they have set up with all the executive orders to go with it, taking over control of the national resources, public and private transportations, and the ability to take you and separate your family and put them into work brigades. And it's crazy to me. And this leads me to my next question. I mean, knowing all this stuff and everything that you've investigated in your time and being on these front lines, it's hard to fathom if we can save this country or not. But how do we best go about reaching individuals' hearts, minds, and souls, at least planting a seed to where they're not turning us away and just labeling, saying, oh, this person's a crackpot? How can we plant the seeds there so people could go back and remember some of the things when it does happen?
Yeah, how can we expedite the increase of knowledge?
Well, I think the best weapon we have on our side is called hypertext links. And when I publish an article like I was referring to earlier, in fact, let me mention that article. You asked me about home invasions. The article that I wrote on August 17th, and people can reference it on my website, is called The Mother of All Conspiracies Aimed at Our Children, and that's August 17th. And in there, just for an example to answer your question, I have the hypertext link to the 110-page manual that I was quoting segments from, and that's there for people to read. You can log on to it, and you can read it, front to back, just like I did, and come to your own conclusions. I think as long as we document what we say, and I'm a trained researcher, and so I'm trained to do this, it's part of my nature, and we give people the opportunity to read it and then decide for themselves. And I look at it this, too, and I find this a lot. There are some people that come to you and they ask for information, you give it to them, and they reject it, but then they come back 6 months later. So I would advise people, as you're educating in kind of your missionary role to awaken the masses, don't judge people. Be kind to them. Understand that this is difficult for them to handle. Because when I first started learning about this stuff, I thought, oh, no, this just can't be true. And people are going to have these kind of reactions. And if we are open to them and don't alienate the masses, if we prove our position, if we are professional in both our appearance and our delivery, we have a greater chance to reach a greater number of people, and there will be a critical mass. But I will tell you this, Joe, I've read the very documents you're referring to with regard to the FEMA camps, and I do think there'll be a move to use various facilities for FEMA camps. But I think when this comes down, I think the fragmentation of society, the scenarios that we've run through in my classes show that the fragmentation of these scenarios is going to be so complete that the government's not going to be exempt from them either. I think that they're going to have a hard time maintaining control in any organizational kind of structure. People are going to walk off the jobs because they've got family members that have been taken. You're going to have people that jump to the other side because they're not going to buy into what's going on. You know, people like the Oath Keepers may actually live up to their oath. And I don't see just society falling apart. I think the New World Order control mechanisms are going to fall apart as well, and you're not going to have a centralized authority in this country for very long.
Interesting. And I agree with you know, look, one of my favorite topics is talking, following the breadcrumbs back to who started this. You know, I mean, where did it begin? And the beginning. Of course, we can go back to biblical, you know, of course, got the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and then of course the various groups, the Trilateral Commission, group, and so on and so forth. These that you've studied, or I'm sure you've had these different groups, or even individuals, who are the most influential and or the most dangerous that we should be looking into or we should be watching?
For my money, I always say follow the money. And if you go to Basel, I think the Bank of International Settlement is a real barometer for what's coming. I'll tell you, one of the reasons why I think there's going to be a banking collapse is because of what the banks have done in the last year. Basel issued an edict to central banks to cut down on their liquidity, to stop loaning money. And then when you looked at what happened on the heels of this, you started seeing massive MERS, mortgage fraud to grab houses. You started to see the Federal Reserve spending $40 billion a month acquiring mortgage-backed securities. In other words, without going through the long laundry list, the bankers, the central bankers, are acquiring hard assets. And I started thinking, okay, why are they doing that? Because if you're going to have a post-economic collapse in which your currency collapses, he who comes out of that collapse with the hard assets, the homes, the shopping malls, and so forth, they're going to be the ones that have won the game. They're going to be ones making the new rules. And I see the banks in this mode right now of acquiring hard assets, and this is why I think the banks are coming down. And what started this whole cascading scenario is the Bank of International Settlement. I don't know that we could say that they're the brainchild and they conduct all the executive functions. I think a lot of that's delegated to the various groups you just mentioned. Each group carries out its own specific purpose. But I do think that the house of cards, when it unfolds and starts to collapse, is going to start by actions from the BIS.
Okay, you know, you had, and I hope I do pronounce her name right, Karen Hudes?
Karen Hudes, yes.
Hudes, okay. In fact, the World Bank whistleblower back, I'm not sure when you had her on, the number of weeks ago,
sometime in June.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. One thing I found really interesting, and you wrote about this, there was a study of the corporations and ownership, and a super entity of 147 tightly knit corporations. All of their ownership was held by other members of the super entity. In other words, just this spaghetti entanglement of super corporations that control 40% of the total wealth, essentially, on our planet. So 1% of the companies were able to control 40% of the entire network, which represents huge. And further investigation in this, I think the top 20 of these corporations are banks, or they don't produce anything. They're financial institutions. One can argue that they produce loans, money, whatever. But I just felt that I found that interview really interesting, based on the 147 number and how everything's tied together. It's like, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. And in fact, let me tell you what I hearken back to. I think we can go a lot further back in history to see this amalgamation of all these entities under a single house. Patrick Wood, who I've had on my show a number of times, and he and I have gotten to be friends, he co-wrote a book with Anthony Sutton called Trilaterals Over Washington. And I read the book in 1980, and I have to tell you that for that brief moment when I read that book, for about 6 months, I was wide awake to what was going on. And this actually coincided, too, with Ronald Reagan running for president, and he accused George Bush, who was in competition with him in the primary, of being in the Trilateral Commission. And I find that really interesting that Anthony and Pat actually came up with this information. In this book, they had a flow chart. Now, I'm sure it's all changed in the 30-plus years that this was published, but they had a flow chart about how the Rockefellers essentially controlled the communications industry, the hard manufacturing industry, while we still had some. And this book was so complete in its analysis, so detailed and so well documented, that what you're saying now with regard to what Karen Hudis is revealing, it's nice to know it's new information, it's updated, but I think, Patrick was really ahead of the curve back in the 1970s when he wrote the book. So, yeah, is there a super entity that controls everything? Well, I don't think it's quite like the rollerball scenario, if you remember that movie from the 70s with James Caan, where 6 corporations ruled the world, but we're certainly moving in that direction. We're already there with the media, with 5 corporations controlling 98% of the media.
That's amazing to think about that. Five corporations controlling 98% of the media. That just blows my mind when you think about that. Wow, it's incredible. Yeah, and folks, look, Dave Hodges has so many great articles. I know. Do you ever sleep? Whatever you take, can you fire me off some? Man, I got to tell you.
Well, I'm on a mission, guys, because I don't think we have a lot of time. And to answer your question, I have nights where I sit in my recliner with my laptop and I put together the information I've gathered from the day and write an article. And sometimes I fall asleep at 1 and I'll wake up at 4 and finish the article and then distribute it. And I have a lot of nights like that. So I'm pretty driven. But, this is not new behavior for me. I was a college basketball coach for a number of years, and I retired from that 2 years ago. And really, you really push yourself. The scouting reports, the endless recruiting. So that was a good training ground for what I'm doing now.
Apparently, because you pump out more articles than I certainly can and do. The articles are very well researched, and I just got an email from someone, Glenn. I just even hate to. I'm just going to tell you, it's just cut to the chase, and it's difficult. And Glenn, let me speak directly to you on this, okay? It's really not cool to insult the host and then ask a question. That's just not cool. But anyway, at least I took it as an insult. But he writes the social, economic, political disruptions in severe ways we talk about, and all these being real possibilities and so on. He says, I believe the only possible save will be the military, and that assumes they're on the correct side of things. Man, okay. And then he writes this: I would like to know, or might I suggest, hosting some credible military or ex-military who can chime in on the military's perspective. There certainly has to be more than a few of these perspectives, don't you think? How do you respond to somebody like that?
Well, I hold out that hope, too. but my prognostication or probabilities tell me it's far less than 50%. If the military was willing to jump sides and take the side of the people, first of all, why would they jump sides when only about 10% of the people are awake? They're not going to get the popular support they need until you had maybe at least a 30 to 50% penetration of acceptance as to what's going on. It'd be a fool's errand. And what are they jumping to? Secondly, the military are going to follow orders, and if they shoot American citizens initially, okay, now they get entrapped into their mission. Entrapment is a sociology phrase that basically says once you're performing the functions of the job, you keep on performing the functions of the job because you're entrapped by it, by the role that you've accepted. And I do believe a lot of the military would be entrapped. And if you go back to groupthink experiments like the Milgram study from the 1960s that showed that people will put someone to death just based on the authority figures of someone wearing a lab coat, and they give the order to do so, and that Stanley Milgram study from 1963, about two-thirds of the military, based on what we have for compliance and obedience studies, would say the military is going to fire on American citizens. About a third won't, and I think they'll be dealt with. But if I were to say something to the listening audience along these lines, don't let yourself be taken to the FEMA camp. If they back the bus up to your house, you're better off dying in your front yard, fighting against it or running and getting shot in the back. I reflect back to what Solzhenitsyn wrote. He said, we should have stood up. If the Gulag people came in, the KGB, and they were grabbing us out of our homes, if they knew they could get shot, we might have been able to stop it. But once we were in the Gulag, we were at their mercy. And Solzhenitsyn wrote about that extensively. And I've already determined myself that I will not be taken prisoner.
Yeah, I can't imagine too many people wanting to be taken prisoner, unfortunately. They're not going to hearken to the warnings.
Yeah.
And
let me add one other
caveat
here to what your listener Glenn was saying. There's also follow-up research on the Milgram study, and they found that when people are educated about the dangers of groupthink and blindly following the orders of an authority figure, that the percentages drop by as much as 50%. What we can do as warriors on the front line here, and you don't have to have a talk show host to do this, you can educate people in law enforcement. You can educate people who are soldiers and ask them, would you do this? This could be your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your friends. And if you start talking to them about it, about the possibilities, will you shoot Americans who won't give up their guns? It forces them to wrestle with it, and we could lower that two-thirds figure from social research maybe down to about a third. If that were to happen, this is a real key development. Then the military might possibly turn in on itself. If enough soldiers felt that they had enough group cohesiveness and enough numbers, they might actually rebel and stand up to these tyrants.
Wow. Great insight there, Mr. Hodges. We're up against the top of the hour break for the coming into the third and final hour, and what we'll do is we'll go to break, and when we come back, we can hit on any issues that you want to hit on. We can take phone calls from listeners. We'll leave it up to you. And folks, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report with our very special guest, Dave Hodges.
Man, you've got to get to his website. I'm sorry to cut you off, man. I'm just so excited about his website, The Common Sense Show. You've got a lot of information on there, Dave. You really do. Great archives. Sorry, Joe. Go ahead.
Yeah, The Common Sense Show. It's on Sunday nights, and we'll get into that information about Dave's show along with the third and final hour of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this Monday, October 7th, 2013. Stay with us.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the third and final hour of this very special Hagmann and Hagmann Report. I'm Doug Hagmann. With me in studio is my son, fellow investigator Joe Hagmann. Together, we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Dave Hodges was only supposed to be on for 2 hours. He's kindly, and I got to tell you, what a great sport. He worked all day, worked all night, worked all last night, had a radio show, took care of the kids, cooked breakfast, cooked lunch, cooked dinner, did all this stuff running around, and he's here. So what we're going to do is we're going to open the phone line, 661-244-9839, 661-244-9839. It's a very special honor to have Dave Hodges with us. I'm being serious now. A very special honor to have him with us. He is a gentleman I do respect a lot. His research is impeccable. His citations are always there, and his knowledge is incredible. I thought I was relatively intelligent. This guy, I got to tell you, this guy's a walking encyclopedia. And it's not false flattery either. It's very true. His work product is really good.
And the impact that he's having on
yes.
the media and alternative media is making a huge difference for the positive. And it is such a blessing to see people out there fighting for other people and expecting nothing back in return except to see those other people come to the realization of the truth.
And you know, people ask, do we have a chance? Well, Dave Hodges represents that chance, and I like to think we you know, we're in there a little bit too. I just want to say hello to Rocco Gambino from Buffalo. I got to tell you, he's our technical consultant only because I've got some compromising pictures from one sultry June evening from a what do they call those little things? I don't know, the little.
You're digging a pretty big hole there.
Yeah, never mind. Yeah, no. Hello, Rocco Gambino, our technical consultant for Buffalo. Glad you're with us, my friend. I want to be in the foxhole with you any day, fighting off the enemy. One of the questions we have for you, Dave, is gentleman Michael writes this. He said, you know, I commute an hour via freeway every day. Given the signs that we're in right now, are there any signs I should look for? So I should leave work, early to get my butt back home in the event of something going south.
I think the lights going out would be a good indicator, and I don't mean to be flippant, but, you know, we don't have complete knowledge, because if we did have complete knowledge and understanding, we'd be able to stop what's coming and guarantee the stoppage. To me, the chest pains, if you will, are these 9 drills and disaster activities that I alluded to. That, to me, I've been told by my insider sources that this is unprecedented in the history of FEMA or DHS, and I think that this is a really, really bad sign.
Okay.
And I feel for this gentleman, because I commute 45 minutes myself. My greatest fear is if the proverbial poop hits the fan, will I be able to reunite with my family? That's a real concern. Certainly as we approach the Grid X, we're going to take precautions. And, you know, I know this sounds horribly paranoid, and I've never done anything like this before, but I'm keeping my son home from school that day. We're not leaving the house. I don't want to wait to see what's going to happen.
But how long, realistically, can you do that for? 1 day, 2 days,
1 day.
Maybe?
One day, maybe.
Okay.
You're right. It's a shot in the dark, Doug. You're exactly right in the implication.
All right. But you're probably exercising very prudent caution given the scenario which we face. And I think on that day or around that time period, I'm going to definitely watch things a little bit closer. Oh, but one more announcement, housekeeping announcement. I should have said this at the top of the hour. Stan Deo, who is scheduled for tomorrow, is having a lot of back problems, and he's not going to be with us tomorrow. So I just want to let people know that. Instead, we're going to be joined not only by Steve Quayle tomorrow, but by someone who I've been trying to get on the program for a long time, or I want to get on the program, RevelationNow.net, RevelationNow.net, a gentleman who has developed some software that gives some indications about the mass shootings. You're not going to want to miss this. This is one of the smartest men that I know in terms of developing software and applying it to the mass casualty events that we've seen before. So I just wanted to get that in there before we go any further with Mr. Hodges. So that's
I wish I would have
night,
known
folks.
about this before I wrote an article. I wrote an article that said, can research help predict the next false flag event? And I was thinking along the same lines, but I didn't know. I'm going to be tuning in. This is fascinating.
Well, you know what I'll do. I'm going to, when I talk to this gentleman tomorrow off air, I'll make sure that he gets your number and you guys can hook up, because I'm sure that he's got so much. If you go to RevelationNow.net, and just look through the information, specifically the information that ties in the magnetic lines and the all this research he's done and this program he developed. Holy cow! It'll just blow your mind.
Does he say that the magnetic lines actually cause people to go crazy?
Yes and no. Not by themselves, but with help. Does that make sense? That's
yes,
kind of like a short answer.
like with HARP.
Yes, with various.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Back in 1997, if you'll allow me to digress for a second, I mentioned
sure.
Bill Pollock a couple of times. Bill Pollock hosted a conference at his home outside Albuquerque, and he had a number of people there, and he invited me, and I didn't add much, but I certainly learned a lot. And I went, and they gave me a video, and I don't know if I still have it. It might not even be usable, but it was an NBC documentary, and the host was Charlton Heston, the late great actor. And in there, they first of all spent the first half dispelling the notion that we really know our history. We really don't. Mankind is much older. But the second part is exactly what you're talking about. They were going to reveal the danger of shifting magnetic lines and projects like Project HARP that were being brought online to manipulate people and their behaviors. Unfortunately, this documentary never aired. Now, I had the studio copy where it said commercial here, and then they went on and presented it. It was fascinating, but NBC killed it.
Killed it. Why? I mean, just to hide that truth? I mean, or just to hide that information?
That'd
Obviously,
be my guess. To me, there were several data points there that I think that they didn't want out. This particular video really woke me up to the fact that the Egyptians did not build the pyramids, and I don't know who did, but they certainly didn't have the technology to lay 65-ton stones on 160-ton stones with 1/200th of an inch margin of error. We can't do that today in a single-story house. This really woke me up to a lot of things about history that are incorrect. Also, it was interesting on the same show, they showed University of Texas archaeologists unearthing limestone that takes millions of years to form, and at the same strata they found dinosaur bones and human bipedal footprints, which really kind of blows some of these notions about how old we are out the window. It doesn't affect my Christian faith, but it makes me take a different look at history. This was really quite the remarkable production. And like I said, this is stuff that the censors from the globalists would not let air. And it was really, really well done. And I'm speaking from an academic, prove your case framework. Charlton Heston was outstanding. The producers of this show were outstanding. And I kept saying, when's it going to air? When's it going to air? And Bill finally let me know. He said, Dave, they've canceled it.
Wow.
And this is after they'd spent about $200,000 on pre-production.
That doesn't surprise me. I don't know. That really doesn't surprise me. Now, I believe in pre-Adamic civilization. In other words, truthfully, I believe that the Bible starts about 6,000 years ago. However, I do believe that the Earth is much older, and of course, there's a race. I mean, that's just me. Okay, there was a race before Adam and Eve, and fallen angels. I believe in that, and the Nephilim, and so on. So, I mean, I've got a kind of a really twisted, but I don't want to say twisted. I've got a really interesting belief structure that is consistent with Bible teaching. However, it opens up other possibilities, and it's pretty consistent with what Steve Quayle and others write about that. But having said that, that's not, it's interesting to talk about. And the pyramids, it's interesting too to study the pyramids and the 19.5. And that our guest tomorrow night is going to be talking, or has written about the pyramids and about the angles, just all sorts of things. It's going to be interesting. So definitely, if you get a chance, tune in. But that said, thank you for allowing me just to babble there for a minute. Joe, if we want to. Oh, by the way, Dave, your latest or your last 3 articles I think were out, probably the best ones you've written. And I would urge everyone to just, folks, go to thecommonsenseshow.com, thecommonsenseshow.com, and the last couple of articles, America's Path to Revolution, and America's Rapidly Approaching Its Day with Destiny. Those 2, and then of course the basic Brzezinski's words point to the coming apocalypse as well. That was fabulously written. So
yeah, that was
a lot of good information. So I just want to say thank you for that. That's thecommonsenseshow.com. Let's go to the phone, Joe.
All right, we're going to go to area code 606 first. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report with Dave Hodges. What's on your mind tonight?
Thanks for taking my call. This is Roger Brown from Kentucky. Dave knows me. I have 2 things that dovetail with what you've been talking about. One of the things I do, I'm an intelligence collection and analysis methodologist. I track the TV shows that are being used to shape public opinion. And there are, in addition to the one that you mentioned earlier, Revolution, there are at least 2 this season that I've identified, and it's easy to pick them out because the writing is several levels of better than the mindless drivel you usually see in sitcoms. So it's easy to pick them out because they're better produced and higher quality than the other shows. The 2 that stand out in particular are Sleepy Hollow, which is being used to shape expectations for the end times if someone were going to attempt to fake it. It contains plot lines such as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's an extension of the Sleepy Hollow myth. The other show, and both by chance are on tonight, is Blacklist. The episode tonight is entitled Wu Jing, which is not a Chinese individual or family name, but it does have association with 5 different aspects of Chinese culture. One of them being a compendium of war books that was published in the around 1044 A.D. It's also the name for a paramilitary force of the People's Republic of China, and associated with 5 classic Chinese books. Since I haven't seen the show, I don't know whether it's a triple or quadruple pun or play on the Wu Jing word, but it's definitely something that's out of the ordinary. So people may want to take a look at those.
I just put them on the DVR, Roger. Thanks. I believe that the global elite, and I've seen evidence of it many times, do transmit their intentions through the media. Roger, let me ask you a question real quick. Did you hear when I was talking to Doug and Joe about the Charlton Heston video that Bill Pollock gave people copies? Did you get a copy of that?
No, I did not. I would like to have a copy of it. I also have some information that would dovetail with that. I wrote my master's thesis as a cross-national study of World War II intelligence operations. Some of the people that I interviewed for that clued me in to a classified Navy intelligence study that was done after World War II in the late 40s or early 50s, and it was specifically looking at evidence of prior civilizations on the North American continent. And that should have been declassified after 30 years, but the National Archives has nothing on it, and I've been looking for it since I found out about it in 1978. I've found several people who read it. It was circulating among the intelligence good old boy network during the Korean and Vietnam conflicts. Unfortunately, none of them could remember the exact title, so I'm having difficulty finding where it's located now. But I am trying to get it declassified. I'm continuing efforts to find it, but that dovetails with the cancellation of the Charlton Heston documentary. It boggles my mind as to what could possibly have turned up in archaeological evidence with all of the stuff that has gotten out, that they would possibly find significant enough that it would need to be classified and still continue to be classified. I have no idea what it could be.
Yeah, it
Roger,
is interesting.
Thank you. I just
That's
want
all
to
I
say
have.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Roger, for that
Thanks
call.
for taking my call.
Yeah, Dave, I mean, he makes a good point, doesn't he? About
Well,
the
he does.
classification.
Roger knows what he's talking about. In fact, actually, speaking of John Wells earlier in the show, Roger was actually on John's show on Coast to Coast, and his topic was death squads. And if you want to lose some sleep, you listen to that presentation. Yeah, there exists now, and I think it's an offshoot of the NDAA, or the NDAA came along to legitimize the practice, but we do have death squads in America. I'm convinced of that. Roger's uncovered it. He's got the proof.
And these are aside from the death panels.
Well, no,
Obamacare.
but okay. So wait a minute. What you're saying, David, is like these Tuesday terrorist meetings. For example, you've got a meeting in the Oval Office, and they throw a bunch of unlucky people's names in a hat, and they pull them out and say, okay, Abdul Rahman is going to be off. Next. Is that what we're talking about? I mean,
well, it's on two levels. You got Anwar Anawlaki and his 16-year-old son, American citizens. Okay, they were denied due process, and they were American citizens and entitled to due process. And then you've got Michael Hastings and Andrew Breitbart. Roger makes a compelling case for death squads. I think they're here. I don't think Obama and Holder are directly involved. They would like to remain, I think, 1 or 2 degrees separated, so it gives them plausible deniability. But let's just say I believe there are henchmen for this president that are carrying out what they feel he needs to have done.
Okay, and I've got it on pretty good authority that with respect to Mr. Hastings, they used the same tactics as they did with Princess Diana. And now Princess Diana information is coming out with the SAS about their involvement, and it was done with a laser-type light, not a rifle shot. I don't know whether you've heard that or not, Dave.
I have.
Okay. All right. And I'm
I have. I mean,
the
Hastings story has a lot of twists and turns to it, like everything from a drone to a bomb. I don't know where the truth lies. I just know we didn't get the truth.
And shouldn't that be enough for the people out there who are saying, oh, you guys are crazy? Wait a minute. We're being lied to at every turn. And if you're going to lie to us about an alleged traffic accident that kills someone, writing about the sensitive subject, John Brennan, yes, John O. Brennan from the passport scandal, remember that? We're not getting the truth, so that should be sufficient to compel additional
Well, I'm sure
discussion.
you've seen the footage preceding the crash where Hastings actually runs a red light at a high rate of speed.
Yes.
So who is chasing him?
And yes, of course, we don't see anything behind them. It's pretty interesting, and the knowledge you can control the cars via remote control. It's interesting, and of course the contacts Hastings had before he was the subject of an FBI investigation. They did not, and I said, I guess he was. So we're not getting the truth, and that alone should keep people on their toes. Joe?
Yeah, we'll move along to another phone call here. Area code 256. We're coming to you next. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report with Dave Hodges. What is your question tonight?
Hi, thank you, Joe, Doug, and Dave. I have a simple question for Dave. he said something about walkie-talkies, and I was just wondering which ones he recommended. And
if my wife were here, I'd bring her into the room and ask her, but she's in transit, and she's the one that made the purchase, and she talked to someone who supposedly was in the know. But we have, I understand, 25 to 30 miles of range. They're battery-operated. Yes, and so we do have them here, but we need to make them more operational. And we checked them out when we first got them, but we haven't done anything for a few years with them. I'll put something on my website when I find out, and I'll try to remember to ask her at dinner tonight. And I'll try to find a place to weave it into my website so people can go and find it. Better yet, I'll put it on Facebook.
I'm not on Facebook.
If you go to Dave Hodges on Facebook, I have another link you can go to called The Common Sense Show, and I'll put it there.
Okay.
Yeah, ma'am, you don't have to on Facebook. You don't have to. You can just go on Facebook and to his page, and then you'll see the information. You don't have to be on Facebook or a member of it.
Okay.
So,
all right. Thank you so much.
Beautiful.
Thank you for the question. You have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Dave, these aren't bricks, are they? I mean, do they look like bricks? The size of bricks?
They look like old cell phones. Remember the old cell phones you couldn't put in your pocket?
Yeah.
That's what they look like.
I still have one. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. So they're pretty robust devices then. Okay.
I remember one of those old phones you had to take in a bag. We had to take in the car.
Sure.
It had its own briefcase bag with it.
Oh yeah. That was my first phone. Yeah, exactly. First cell phone.
Yeah, that's back in the late 80s.
All right.
Whatever happened to payphones? Okay.
Yeah, those disappeared. Moving along here, 304, we're coming to you next. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report with Dave Hodges.
Yeah, good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Phil from West Virginia. What is Dave's opinion of a black government within this government that doesn't really, it has its own agenda, and what's your opinion on that?
Well, like a shadow government, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's in the shadows very much now. We know who the players are, at least the frontline participants from the shadow government. That would be Rockefeller, Kissinger, Brzezinski, your old familiar players. That's out in the open. Now, does it go deeper and more nefarious? I know the UFO crowd likes to talk about a group called MJ-12. I have no idea if that's true or not true. I haven't really looked into that issue very much. But to think that the president is actually running the show, that's ludicrous. In fact, Doug, have you ever heard this? Joe, have you ever heard this as well? I've been told that on some issues the president only has a 16th level security in terms of his access to information. There are 15 levels above him.
Oh, yes, I have heard that. And the numbers vary ever so slightly, but yes, I've heard that just almost word for word, where he's not or he does not have the security clearance to be read in on certain operations. Yes. And what does that say about our country?
Well, it says that the ideals of a republic democracy are really more of an illusion.
That's correct. Yeah, you're exactly right. I find it difficult to believe that. Let me tell you, and ladies, let me tell you this. I'm a little bit concerned. People believe. How could I put this? I believe that Obama lost his utility in a lot of ways. In other words, much like Kennedy, even much like Lincoln, he's lost his utility at this point. They're done with him. I could see it ending badly for Obama. Any thoughts on that, Dave?
I think he's between a rock and a hard place. They might be done with him. I think it's possible. But let's go back to the month of May, where he had 5 scandals, all greater than Watergate in magnitude, surface within a 10-day period in the mainstream media. Now, we know the mainstream media is controlled So therefore, I have to look at this as an orchestrated set of events. And to me, what was going on at that time is a good clue as to what the pressure being applied was, and that's to get off your duff and get into Syria as a precursor to get into Iran and make them once and for all stop undermining the petrodollar by selling oil for gold. That's what I think was happening in May. Obama has failed, and he has failed miserably in getting us into Syria. So they may have abandoned him, and I'll tell you, this actually works into part of why I think we're in a real danger zone for false flag events. If you can't get Obama into Syria and start the war that you want to start, let's just bypass that step, and the U.S. military, the U.S. government is no longer useful to us. We don't need them. Let's collapse the system. And that's where I think we might be. And I say might be, but it's what makes sense to me. And let me just digress just for a second. I don't pretend to know all things, and my logic is certainly not flawless. But one of the things that I had to do as a college basketball coach, and also to some degree as a mental health counselor, I had to learn to anticipate what the other side or what my client was going to say, think, or do in certain situations. But particularly in coaching, I wanted to know that opposing coach and his strategies, ideas, what he would do, for a last shot scenario in a game. So I'd be prepared. And that training, I think, really has got me in the mindset of saying, okay, if I were running the show and I were a Brzezinski or I were a Kissinger or some globalist, what would be the strategy that I would employ? What would I be after? And what I'm finding is if you start thinking that way, think about what makes sense to the other side, then it becomes easier to predict their next action, and I find I'm right more than I'm wrong because I feel I have their playbook.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. So you're thinking like them. You're anticipating their next move, and you're
and it's something that I've really grown accustomed to doing. It was part of my professional training, and then you bring in the research applications that I work in, and can you build a case? And you put the case up on the wall, and it's like you start connecting dots.
Okay.
And pretty soon a picture begins to emerge. And I know I don't need to explain that to you, Doug, because I've seen you and Joe do that a lot, an awful lot.
Well, investigative training and experience, you connect the dots. You do. Actually, we do have a board, a pin board with kind of like in those those crime shows where you can connect the dots with the people, and it seems like there's a lot of interweaving going on between the players. But no, I get what you're saying. Very interesting. Joe, are we got any additional callers here?
We're going to move on to another caller. 865 area code. We're coming to you next. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report.
Hello.
Hey.
Yes.
Good evening.
You're up.
Yeah. My name's David. I'm in Tennessee. I was wondering if anybody has heard anything else about those czars, the 30-something czars that Obama hired at the beginning of his first term. Where did they happen to go? And maybe they're over some of these death squats or something?
Dave,
well, I don't know that. I don't think the czars have gone anywhere, but I think that term has fallen into disfavor because I think they realized pretty quickly that we were conditioned from the Cold War era to reject anything that remotely sounded like the Soviet Union or Russia, and czars certainly is tied into that country's past. So I don't hear that term any longer. I don't know why they use the term. I mean, I'll tell you what I thought originally when they were saying czar this and czar that. I think it was an announcement of the New World Order direction change. And I think it was highly symbolic. But I think they found that it alienated a lot of people, and they didn't want to have an impetus that would cause people to wake up in any greater numbers than already are. That's my guess. Doug, do you know anything about what's happened with the czars? I haven't followed it.
Yeah, the only thing I've heard was they've trimmed some of them. However, most of them are still in place.
Renamed as advisors.
Yeah, exactly. They don't use the same verbiage, but they're still there in the background. But honestly, they've taken a back seat, at least visibly, but they're still there.
Yeah,
interesting.
And people like Cass Sunstein, John Holdren, these people that the caller was referring to, and these people have come out and said things like, we are geoengineering the planet due to man-made global warming, or we're going to infiltrate alternative media groups by hiring people to go in there and.
Oh, a lot of them are kind of interlapping with the UN and the global initiatives as well.
Oh yeah, and a lot of our agencies, federal executive agencies. Now we talk about have police forces. Mr. Hodges, have you seen a lot of the new agencies? I think we talked about this a couple shows ago. There was 87 government agencies that now have police forces, from the EPA to the USDA to NASA, and the list goes on from there. Have you heard about
the National Weather Service?
Yeah.
Acquiring millions of rounds of ammunition. I mean, what's that about?
Yeah, or do you think these are actual legitimate police forces for some reason, or do you think that they're using these branches of agencies to cover for maybe one or two agencies in particular that will be the enforcement branch?
That's a really good question. When I first heard that these kind of out-of-the-way federal agencies, the more obscure ones, were acquiring arms and ammunition, I thought they just didn't want to add to the 2.3 billion rounds of ammunition we know that DHS already procured. And so this was a secondary kind of procurement, but the final source would be DHS. And I can't discount that possibility. But also, we could be just looking at the total militarization of the federal government in preparation for fighting the people.
Yeah, I'm on board with that.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on in the calls here, we're going to go to area code 937. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report with Dave Hodges. What's on your mind tonight?
937, you're up.
Yeah, I was just curious. I listened to your program. I don't have internet right now, and I listened to your program with the phone.
Sure.
And I was wondering if Mr. Hodges had any way of doing that with his show.
I didn't catch the mode of what you're listening to Doug and Joe show on.
His phone?
Yeah.
Oh, your phone?
iPhone.
Wait, I'm not the techie guy on our network, but I do believe you can call into a number and listen to the show. If you go to republicbroadcasting.org, I believe they do have a phone app.
Right now. I don't have internet right now. That's why.
Okay. He's working with just a phone, I think.
You know what? Hang on, and I'll try as best I can to get this out before the end of the show. But I don't know where it's at on our website.
And I'll look on the website too for you.
Yeah, and I know it's kind of embarrassing to say that, but guys, they set it up at RBN. They treat me so well. I just show up and do my show. They take care of all the technical stuff for me. I have nothing to worry about.
Yeah, and thank you, caller. We'll look for that line. A lot of places have listen-in lines now, and we'll check and see if that's the case on your show, Mr. Hodges. And we're going to take one more phone call here as we got about 18 minutes left of the show. We're going to go to 847 next. You're our final caller of the night with Dave Hodges. What's on your mind tonight?
Good evening, gentlemen. I just had a question. I am residing in the Midwest right now in the northern suburbs, and I live in an apartment, and I wanted to know what can be the best advice for us for defense, just in case when the collapse happens.
Have enough food and survival supplies stocked up. Know your neighbors. Encourage them to do the same thing so they're not beating down your door. And I would install high security deadbolt locks. I'd even go to my apartment manager and say, for security reasons, would you mind if I put a real strong security door on the apartment if you can afford to do so?
Yeah. And what you said earlier, too, about getting your neighborhood, your community involved, like-minded.
Just for people in apartment complexes, too.
Yeah, understand that what's going to be happening most likely is what we talked about earlier. People are going to be fighting other people. It's not going to be the people against the ruling authoritarian class. It's not going to be fighting for freedom. We're going to be fighting each other for survival. And if we could all get on the same page and understand that, it would mitigate what is seeming to be an inevitable outcome of us fighting each other just to survive, and which would be the last thing.
The more you can reach out to people, the better off you are going into the crisis. Gentlemen, I have that number that the previous caller requested to listen to my show on. You can call area code 619-550-0901 to listen live on your phone. Again, that number is 619-550-0901. And if he was specifically asking about my show airs 9 p.m. to midnight Central Time.
All right, very good.
Thank you,
very good.
Hodges.
Yeah, and it's well worth it. It's. But by the way, folks, I'm gonna. Hopefully, I'm not out of line by saying this. I'm going to be a guest on your program next week. I believe it. Do we arrange that or?
Yes, we did.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
Yes,
if you
we did.
Your
and
mind on that after tonight.
Well, you know what I decided to do, and I thought I'd have John Wells on for this specific purpose. John touches a lot of people who are in the know, and I said, John, I'm going to kind of give you an open mic. You come on and tell us what you think we ought to know, and we'll have a conversation about these things. And Doug, I want to do the same thing with you. You know, the same offer is, what do you think people ought to know, and more importantly, what can we do to prepare for these? And we had a great discussion last night with John, and it took some twists and turns that I'm sure that when you're on, it'll be no less satisfying.
Oh, yeah, I just can't wait. It's going to be a great time. Dave, I'll tell you what, we're running up against the close of the program here shortly. We're going to be closing out with some end news here. I just want to say I want to thank you so very much for being a wonderful guest on our program. I know we kept you over time, and you're very gracious about it.
Well, it's my pleasure to do so. I'll do it any time.
Oh, and folks, that's the Common Sense Show. Dave Hodges has been our guest. Dave, talk to you soon, and if not before, talk to you next week.
Okay, my friend.
God bless you and your family. Take care.
God bless you guys, too. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Folks, that was Dave Hodges from the Common Sense Show. My goodness, what a
fantastic interview.
Yeah, it really was.
Very smart man, on the cutting edge, or tip of the spear of the alternative media, making waves where the military-industrial elite, satanic, does not like people to be making waves. And as many people as we can to get other people to begin to be leaders in their communities, begin to be voices of reason in these times of insanity. We need as many people like that as possible.
You hit your mic away from your mouth there. By the way, I really believe, ladies and gentlemen, everyone listening to this show, like I've always said before, I believe that God has put you where you're at right now for a reason. When Joe and I started what we're doing, we had no clue what we were doing, and we still don't. And I'm not trying to be glib about this, but we're just following. I believe following what directions that we were told to take, and I believe that we are in the right place. But I believe you're in the right place, and for as much as you might get laughed at, made fun of, chided about your beliefs, or even the discord within the family, and I've been seeing a lot of that, a lot of discord, a lot of betrayal, a lot of hate, just a lot of hate, which I don't know where it's coming from. I really don't, except to say it's from the dark side. It really is. But I do see like a fog that rolls in from the ocean. If you've ever lived on either coast, the fog rolling in, and I can see that just coming across the land as this darkness. if you can't feel it, then you're not paying attention. I see it coming, and as Dave pointed out, look, I believe we are at this very important juncture of events, and I really think that although the Illuminati, the Luciferians, the Satanists, the people, the occult, the people behind the power, the visible power here in the United States, even though they've got plans, as my friend likes to say and has said before, don't forget, even when Satan has taken over, or the Antichrist has taken over, don't forget he gets trouble from Greece or from Crete. Having said that, we can certainly cause our share of trouble and not allow the agenda, or not make it easy for them anyway, and perhaps in so doing save some lives or allow some lives to be converted and saved in the meantime. And I think that's what we're here for. I really do. But do you notice though during this whole thing, Joe, that there was really no, it was matter of fact. It was, let's walk calmly to the lifeboats, and because let's get educated, and let's be calm about this, and let's walk calmly to the lifeboats to safety, as opposed to, let's.
Now we're seeing the slow jog begin.
Yeah. But no, you know what I mean. It's not a. It's not this chaotic, the sky is falling, a Chicken Little type of environment. And I think that what we need to do is we need to keep our wits about us, especially now. Because, when the bullets are flying, when the chaos is all around us, that's not the time to make your plans. That's not the time to make your preparations. The time for that is now, in this moment of silence and the calm before the storm. Then there was silence in the heavens for a half hour. I believe that's a scripture. So even though it may not be contextually accurate for the present moment, we can use it as an example by saying, look, we've got I don't know how much time we've got, but we've got some time. And we've got enough time to perhaps make some plans. But tonight, tomorrow, make a list. Be the leader of your family. If you're listening to this and you're the wife or you're the daughter or the son or the father, whoever you might be, take the lead. And even if you've got to do it without the assistance of others, you can still do it. You can still buy the extra can of food at the store if that's what it takes, or the extra couple of cans. You can still place an order over the internet with our sponsors. There are many things you can do to quietly, methodically get ready and get spiritually in tune as well. I like to tell people too to go back over our 5 or so Sunday programs with Pastor David Langford. I think that there's a lot of good information in that, and I really think that during that time that we had those, it was 5 consecutive Sunday programs, and I'll have to put it up on under the guest section in our website.
Yeah,
I do believe that served a purpose.
Yes, it did. And I just want to hit a few short pieces of news here, an audio clip and some news in the last 8 minutes we have. One, this comes out from yesterday from Blacklisted News. A eyewitness says police pulled child from a car, then opened fire on her in the strange D.C. shooting of a woman who apparently rammed a barricade at the White House. Here is a 2-minute audio that was an interview given by Wolf Blitzer, and he's asking this lady questions. And listen closely, towards the middle of this 2-minute interview, she said, I saw them pulling a child out of the car, and then they opened up with bullets.
This is trending on Twitter right now, as a matter of fact.
Okay, here we go.
Joining me now, Patty Bills. She was an eyewitness to the incident up on Capitol Hill today. Patty, so what happened?
Pretty frightening. I work right there at Faith in Action, which is on 2nd Street that comes to the corner of Maryland. And first I heard a lot of the sirens. I heard a lot of commotion. You could hear from the police cars, which took me to the 2nd floor, which is a very good view. Wide open windows. I looked out, and that's where I saw the vehicle speeding down, the black car that hit. It appeared to be the police officer's trash can is standing there and a police car, which turned the car sideways. There's a little window booth where the policemen stand and the security guards that guard us every day on the corner. And at that time, the car was surrounded by police and a lot of armed men, and that's where the gunfire began.
Did you see the child in the car too?
That's when I saw them trying to pull someone from the car and realized when they actually pulled someone from the car, it was a child. And it takes you back a little bit at that moment. And as soon as the child was pulled from the car is when the gunfire really let loose.
And you heard the gunshots?
I heard the gunshots. I saw the policeman shooting. It appeared someone got out, and it looked like a rush of people running. So at that particular time, you didn't know if there was more suspects involved.
You must have been scared out of your mind.
Very frightened.
What did you do?
At first, when you go to the window, you go and just wondering what is happening. Because when you hear the police cars and the sirens, you know, as an arrested person, want to look. But then when the gunfire started, I stepped back from the window. But then out of curiosity, you wanted to peer around just to see. And then it became very involved. A lot of gunfire, a lot of police, a lot of security. And at that particular time, I went back downstairs and came right out the door to ask the police what was going on and what could we do to be safer.
How are you doing now?
I'm better now. It was very emotional earlier. It's a very tough and frightening thing when you have that many gunfire happening around you and bullets flying and just a commotion. We've had a lot go on in D.C. lately.
Certainly have. I'm glad you're okay, Patty. Thank you.
So, after the baby was taken from the car, that's when the cops really let loose with the gunfire. From what that lady said, also updating on the child, the family has not been able to see the body of their daughter or sister. They have been shown a picture, but has not been able to see her actual body, and the child has not been in contact with any of the family. The family's been told that the child's in a safe place, yet not with the family.
What? No words.
Yeah,
Just
I got
words.
that from your stuttering. No, it is sad. It is, good points people made in the chat room. Where's Jesse Jackson? Where's, Al Sharpton? Where are the people standing up for civil liberties? But we must remember they only stand up when it fits an agenda.
Exactly. And as much as politics is not really involved in this, but just imagine having George Bush in the White House and having George Bush overseeing, this, and having this happen in the same fashion. In a New York minute, you'd have Jackson, you'd have, you would just have this cry of racism by the progressive pundits, and I've got to say that it's not a political issue, and look, she drove from Connecticut to Washington D.C. The medication, you're not going to hear about this because it's covered behind Big Pharma, where that she was taking a sleeping medication, and then she was prescribed another sleeping medication that was contraindicated with the first.
They said that they weaned her off the medication. She was only suffering from the depression after having a baby, postpartum stress.
Right.
And that she was on a medication, and the doctors had successfully weaned her off of this medication. This is what was reported in the news in the second video from that clip.
But would you expect anything less? Would you expect them to say anything less?
Regardless, medication or no medication, the woman was unarmed.
Right.
She had a baby in the backseat of the car.
Right.
There was a whole host of other ways people could have handled this. The police could have handled this incident.
Normally I would not second guess. I mean, normally you don't second guess a police situation or second guess the situation because you don't know. It could have been a threat with a car packed full of explosives, but clearly this was not the case. So I just want to say that my heart goes out to the family, and I do believe that an independent inquiry into this should be made. I'm not talking about a DOJ inquiry. I'm talking about an independent inquiry should be made, because I do believe that there was certainly all of overkill employed here. And what's the mentality? And by the way, if you've ever been in this situation of having both uniformed and non-uniformed police officers screaming at you, holding guns at you, and you're going to tell me that you know exactly how you're going to react if you've had no training, I can guarantee you don't know that. When you're on the wrong side of the guns, and especially if people are out of uniform pointing guns at you, not knowing who is pointing the gun at you, there's a lot of stuff that goes through your mind. So please don't ascribe blame to the driver of the car. But I do think we need an independent inquiry on this.
Yeah. And with that, I think we're going to close out the show because all the news we have to cover is grim and
actually
nothing
we're
good
up
to end the
against
show.
the
And we
end
have
of the show.
90 seconds left. Tomorrow, we will be joined by Michael Arevna. Michael Arevna from RevelationNow.net with Steve Quayle. I got to tell you, this is a program you don't want to miss. You missed telling me about the Steve Quayle part, but that's okay. Steve. As a matter of fact, we asked Steve to come on because Michael Arevna, his research is so incredibly. I went through it, and I had to call Steve a couple of times, and I said, Steve, look, man, I understand this, except I'm not sure I know what questions to ask. And I kept